The arc that changed the Star Stream. The Great War between Saints and Demons is my favorite arc in Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint so far, and I will be discussing about the arc and why I loved it in this video. To preface, there's going to be many spoilers as I'm going to be talking about a lot of information about the novel, and the manhwa has not caught up to this point. So I'll pause for a couple seconds for those who do not want to hear spoilers. The video is going to be set up into 4 main parts. The introduction or the lead up to the Great War, then the Isle of Reincarnation, then the actual war, and then finally the conflict with the Outer Gods with the Apocalypse Dragon. The reason that the war even happened in the first place is thanks to our main characters, as they said that their giant story, the torch that swallowed the myth, isn't good or evil. And it caused a lot of outrage with the constellations of good and evil during the award ceremony that happens with the constellations of good and evil to decide on who has more influence or power over the Star Stream. Then after the ceremony, Kim Do-chka unleashes a bombshell with the main cast, basically telling them finally, which I actually love because it took him forever to say, but that they're basically old characters in a book that he's read. And so that kind of bounces off into what the beginning of the Great War between Saints and Demons, basically the beginning of that. That kind of just ties into that, as at the beginning of the arc, the very beginning, the entire main cast is kind of just like a little bit in grief as they view Kim Do-chka as someone who has deceived them with basically withholding many information and such so. And you're probably wondering about what happened with Yoo Jun-yuk. He learned about it through other means, like he learned it through Osmodeus, who's part of the Seekers of the End. But also, I just want to say this, I'm going to butcher a lot of names, so yeah. But moving back, with the whole entire company just in grief, they kind of took a couple days break to kind of just get their thoughts out. And in the end, they view Kim Do-chka still as Kim Do-chka, as they think about it, and they're like, he has sacrificed himself so much for us, and he actually still truly is the same person. He truly loves us as a family, and we love him too. And so with the whole entire team just in good spirits, they carry on with these scenarios, as to even participate in the war, they have to reach scenario 65, which right now they're at scenario 60. And overall, the scenarios in between 65 and 60 weren't as tough. They weren't that tough compared to the Giant Tamaki. So once they reach scenario 65 to be able to join the Great War, everyone kind of unites and is ready to depart. Now on to the Isle of Reincarnation, or the Isle of Reincarnators. What the Isle basically is a museum of ancient stories that had disappeared in the back alleys of the ever-changing era. Basically, it includes stories of swordsmen, 9-class magicians, dragons, the old typical fantasy type of stuff. So when the team first goes through the portal to the scenario, they're meted by Byung, the Doki that is basically best friends with Kim Do-chka. And surprisingly enough, he's pretty high up in the bureau. He's over here managing the entire war, which is kind of crazy. But basically, to begin with, they first have to go onto what is known as the tutorial island, as the Isle of Reincarnation is a set of bunch of islands surrounding one giant island. So you'll be sent to one of these smaller, further out islands with a bunch of other constellations, demon kings, and whatnot. And basically the goal of the tutorial is to survive a night. And when Byung was basically discussing that to the constellations demon kings, they're over here arrogant as always. They pretty much said, why do we have to do a tutorial? You're degrading us and stuff like that. But what Byung said is, well, you guys should actually pay attention, but it's fine. Well, you guys could like quickly do the tutorial and move on to more like the main event and stuff like that. And Kim Do-chka, he knows, of course he knows how this tutorial is actually gonna be pretty rough. So basically everyone gets sent out to the islands. Luckily enough, the Kim Do-chka company basically all spawn on the islands and stuff safely. And Kim Do-chka gave, of course, everyone a rundown beforehand on what to do. What makes the tutorial island so special and dangerous, it's where the first generation stories exist. So for example, stories about knights, dragons, ogres, goblins, that type of stuff. There isn't anything regarding SSS rank adventurers or the Doki bag systems pretty much. And even Master Swordsman and Ninth Circle magicians. Those all don't exist here. Due to that, it limits all the constellations and demon kings' abilities, as first of all, their stats decrease a lot. Like Kim Do-chka, he basically reverts back to his normal self before scenarios even happened, and he feels the weight of unbroken fate. Then there's the whole thing about magicians. As soon as Kim Do-chka spawns onto the island, he's face to face against a demon king, the demon king of the 65th demon realm, Andreas. And as soon as they see each other, it's kill on sight. And Andreas tries to unleash a 9th circle attack, Hellfire, and it doesn't do anything. It just doesn't exist pretty much. And they're both stunned. But Kim Do-chka, of course, after his bunch of battles, knows I have to kill him, and so he defeats him. But yeah, it limits the ability of everyone so much. And it boils down now. You're probably wondering, what makes you strong here? It's, first of all, your stories and your stigmas. Stories, overall, the most important thing in Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. It's the general consensus that without stories, nothing would exist, and stories give power to everyone. So stories are a big factor when it comes to surviving here on Tutorial Island. And you're probably wondering about the fourth wall, about how, is it still viable? Is it still a strength for him? And actually no, which I was shocked about when reading, that the fourth wall was actually very restricted. Obviously the fourth wall has been weakened down and stuff, but seeing the fourth wall not being used and Kim Do-chka trying to survive on the island, I love, because it shows a side of Kim Do-chka that's without the influence of the fourth wall. As the fourth wall has kind of just been there with Kim Do-chka since the start. It's always been with him, and it influences him. It influences decisions. It influences how he faces challenges. And it's like a parasite, you can say. It's a symbiotic relationship with Kim Do-chka. During the tutorial, Kim Do-chka has to fight goblins, and you probably would expect that these goblins are pretty weak, so did the constellations and demon kings. But in reality, these goblins are pretty strong. They effortlessly destroy constellations and demon kings who carelessly think they're so much stronger. These goblins are so weak, being arrogant. Same thing for ogres. They view the ogres as nothing, little like weaklings and stuff, and they get destroyed. And so Kim Do-shka thought that it's a good idea to jump a single goblin, but he didn't think about that goblins and stories always work together. So instead he gets attacked by 2 more goblins, and when he gets stabbed, he's thinking that the 4th wall is gonna kick in. At least that's what I, the reader, would think. Because the 4th wall is also a way for Kim Do-shka to cope with physical pain and emotional pain. And without the 4th wall, this causes Kim Do-shka to actually feel all the pain that he's meant to experience like others. It helps him overall, as he can't always rely on the 4th wall. And so while he's getting jumped by the goblins, he realizes that stories and stigmas, they can be used. So he used Song of Swords not as a weapon, but as a signal to Li Jinyi as her constellation, the maritime war god, is basically that's his stigma. So that will help with sending a signal off to one of Kim Do-shka's allies to actually save him. And so she comes and actually saves him. They talk about how she's a character and stuff, more character development with that. And I love the little signal, or just the little emphasis on the little charm on Li Jinyi's sword, as that's the charm of her deceased friend that she had to kill back all the way at scenario 1. I just like that detail. Now in the safe zone, the safe zone is a village, and the village is filled with a bunch of reincarnators. Shocker, I know, considering this is the Isle of Reincarnation. Basically, these reincarnators, they're similar to, you could say, constellations, in that they don't die technically, but they still have some fail-safe against death. Reincarnators just keep on regressing, while constellations just, they don't fully die unless their stories are completely just gone. Same thing for reincarnators. But while they're here, a couple other constellations, demon kings, also found this village for safety. With these demon kings and constellations obviously always being arrogant, they try to boss around these reincarnators by telling them, oh, go do this, do that, and stuff. Meanwhile, these reincarnators, they're over here doing their jobs, they're just living peaceful lives. But one thing that piques interest from Kim Do-shka is all of them are using stories. For example, one of them is using a story about cutting wood for 100+ years or something. And it shows that they may be dangerous. And it turns out, yeah, they're pretty dangerous. As the constellations and demon kings keep on demanding, all the reincarnators are making fun of them, but one of them especially does, and causes one of the demon kings to walk up to it to, try to bully him, rough him up, show him who's boss. And instead, that demon king is very much so humbled and almost killed. And the reincarnated that the demon king unluckily tried to attack is the one invincible fist, Yu Ho-seung, the master of the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint, and Kiramos, Kim Do-shka's master. 2 of the strongest transcendents in all of Omniscient readers. So when Kim Do-shka realizes it's him, he pretty much begs, can you teach me about story control? Which this is what this whole part of this arc is about. It's to teach Kim Do-shka story control. Well, in general, the concept of stories. To understand what a story is and to listen to your stories. That right there is the biggest thing. To listen to your stories and understand what they want. As currently, Kim Do-cha's stories are a little bit of a mess in the sense that you got some stories that are vibing, like the Demon Realm Spring, the King of a Kingless World. But then you got other stories that pretty much are threatening the other stories. And this actually kind of like makes me think about like DID, dissociative identity disorder, where someone has multiple personalities and they can switch from each personality, and it causes them to basically become different people. And that's the same thing with stories, as over time, if you don't control your stories enough, you become them. That's what happened to the Demon King. That Demon King who tried to fight the Invincible Fist. As the Demon King was controlled by its own story, which its story was to basically punish the weak while the strong get stronger and stuff. He was controlled by that story, and that's what's happening to Kim Do-cha if he doesn't learn story control. As the torch that swallowed the myth, it's trying to force Kim Do-cha. It's like the problem child you could think of. Like, for example, there's many cases of DID, and one type of scenario could be that you have multiple personalities, but then there's one personality that's just scary. It's like a monster, you could say. It's that personality. It's that story. The torch that swallows the myth is that story. It's the problem child. And so Kim Do-cha learns story control from the Invincible Fist. When Kim Do-cha is like learning story control, it comes naturally to him. Like, he's able to understand it and use it super well. Even to the point where the Invincible Fist is like, I've never seen anyone as talented as you. As, for example, the Invincible Fist, like, gave a rock to Kim Do-cha and explained to him, like, stories and how a story is named and stuff. And guess what? That rock and Kim Do-cha formed a story. And it may be a small story, but it's a story nonetheless. The story of the Pebble and I. And that's really interesting because it keeps on showing how small stories still make up everything. But what I find the most fascinating is that Kim Do-cha couldn't learn skills. For example, Wave the Wind and Electrification. He couldn't learn them like the traditional way. So he had to use other ways to learn it. Instead of learning, he more or less took the skills. For example, with Wave the Wind, bookmark. Electrification, bookmark. He bookmarked the skills as he has read through the characters. The more understanding he gets from the characters, the better of a skill and like longer time and whatnot the skill can be. He is a reader, so he understands that the best. That's why story control comes so easy to him. It's because he understands the story, like what the different stories are trying to ask for, you can say, better than anyone else, because he is a reader. Obviously, you may make the argument of like the author understanding a story better than its reader. That could be true, but I feel as though a reader can truly appreciate what a story is, as they themselves aren't the one who makes it. They're the ones that read it, while an author can't fully appreciate it, as they are the ones that make the story. That, I feel like, is the biggest difference between Han Seo-young and Kim Do-cha. One can actually appreciate stories, while the other one understands how to make stories and feels appreciated when someone reads them. Pretty much what the whole tutorial island was there to be. It's to show the influence of the Isle of Reincarnation in the upcoming battles. It was also to teach Kim Do-cha story control. probably the strongest strength of his, as stories from here on out, or even from all the way back when stories were first used in like the revolutionary arc, stories have always been a pivotal part of the story, and gaining an ability to just strengthen them and to understand them, to use them to their fullest capabilities, is just so strong and important. Also, on a side note, all of Kim Do-chka's other allies like Jung Ki-won, Shin Yusung, Lee Young, and then Lee Hyung-sun, and Jang Hwan, Jang Hae-won, they all are on like a separate island, I think, if I recall, and they're surviving, but it's a little rough there. But one big thing though that I'm really I love is that Jang Hyung is actually had like a awakening, is going to have a evolution of attribute, which is like so important, because I feel like they haven't like been that relevant in this story overall, considering they were like the quote-unquote third protagonist of the original novel, which I find very interesting. But I feel I love that they're going to have a lot more influence, I guess, later on in this arc, and I can't wait for that. Now moving on to the middle island. The middle island unlocks previous abilities, so stats increase, you could use more skills, as due to this island unlocking second generation stories. So you're able to use magic now. There's swordsmen, master swordsmen, there's 9-tier magicians now, and as such you can use those abilities. And what this whole entire part of the arc is about is taking necklaces. Well, actually, that's the scenario. What this entire arc is about is, first, Osmodeus versus Michael, and second is the trio. The trio's back together. Basically, Yujin, Yuk, and Kim Do-chka make up, since both of them kind of suck at just communicating to each other, and Han Se-young is the mediator as the author to bring the reader and main character, which is, I'm just thinking, is so cool, because Han Se-young is the author, first of all, but what she's doing is she's trying to rekindle their relationship. The main character, Yujin Yuk, his relationship with Kim Do-chka, which I love, because it's the author making the relationship between the reader and the main character back together. I love that. But yeah, that's the other part of the arc. So now I'll discuss about the scenario. So the scenario is just getting name tags. So these name tags contain the person's modifier, which the modifier, I'm not 100% sure for what the modifier is, incarnations, as I'm not too sure, because Anna Croft also shows up in this arc. So I'm not too sure about that, but it contains the modifiers of the Demon Kings and Constellations. And as such, the way it is formatted, for example, Kim Do-chka's is the Demon King of Salvation. An example could be that the syllables, so Sal, and then Vei, and then Shun, those are separated. So one thing that makes this scenario a little unique is that you could snatch certain parts of the modifier. So for example, if someone takes part of Kim Do-chka's modifier, it could be the of, or it could be the salvation part, like the Sal part, to add on to there, as everyone here has to collect the modified necklace they're assigned to. And as such, Kim Do-chka is right now searching for that. And while he's searching for what's happening and stuff, he feels a strong status. And guess who it is? It's Michael. Michael's over here slaughtering everyone. And Michael is pretty much done, just looking through the necklaces and is scanning out if there's any lackeys left, pretty much. And he looks at Kim Do-chka's location and he knows he's screwed if he sees Michael, as Michael is pretty much the second strongest in Eden, in the sense that he is almost a mythic constellation. He is as high as possible you could be as a narrative constellation, and he is Eden's downfall, pretty much. And it's also that Michael wants to kill Kim Do-chka because they both share similar modifiers, as they're both modifiers regarding basically salvation and being a savior. As later on you guys see that Michael is also a demon king. So yeah, but Michael's scouting out and Kim Do-chka uses Pebble and Eye, because the story begins telling as the story understands Kim Do-chka. The stories can see what's happening to Kim Do-chka, and Pebble and Eye basically turns Kim Do-chka's presence into a pebble, which saves him. Now with Kim Do-chka being safe, he spots Anna Croft, which is interesting because Anna Croft right now is supposed to be participating in the giant story Ragnarok in Asgard instead of the Great War. So when they meet up, he notices that Anna Croft is not looking too good. She has scars, she's just not doing well, and that kind of just that screams that she pretty much got kicked out of Asgard. Because originally she's supposed to use Asgard and stuff. Asgard was her biggest backer, and now she isn't. So she's kind of just trying to survive now, scrape by. And to do this, Kim Do-chka is like, alright, how about this? Michael's here, let's try to kill him. Anna Croft is like, I don't know about that. That might be a little dangerous. Kim Do-chka's like, trust. And she's like, okay. And so they formulate a plan, which is to talk with Asmodeus, who basically those three can team up and basically beat Michael, kill him. And now I want to kind of talk about Asmodeus and Anna Croft both as characters. I would say that Asmodeus has been used way better than Anna Croft. I feel as though Anna Croft is kind of just lingering there while Asmodeus actually does stuff. He actually goes out of his way and does things that actually affect our main characters. Anna Croft, I feel like she's mostly just a play toy. Basically, she just gets used by everyone. She thinks she's a genius, but she isn't. And I feel as though that makes her impact on stuff, not as much. She's kind of just a background character. I know what everyone's gonna say. She probably isn't, but I feel as though she is kind of a background character. She doesn't have enough influence in the story that I feel as though you could maybe get her out of the story and things wouldn't change as much. Because even her main ability that gave her the title Prophet, that's not even useful anymore because it kind of just gets counteracted by different abilities, so she just can't look and stuff, which is it kind of sucks because I feel like she had a lot of build up as a character, and his showings now aren't the best. The Gourmet Association arc, she tried her best to basically gain a story from that, but instead she got played like a fiddle by Kim Do-chka, and he got a story instead. Meanwhile, you got Asmodeus, who actually has done stuff. He's actually been a threat, almost killing Kim Do-chka and Yoo Jin-yuk, and he's just been lingering there. He is more of a lingering threat, and in this arc he actually shows more about himself and about the Seekers of the End, which the Seekers of the End I'll discuss later on in this video, because that's another completely actually really interesting thing. They're just the better prophets from all the way back at the beginning of the novel, with the different people who read the original novels chapters and stuff, they are like the prophets, but these Seekers of the End are just better because they're stronger. They're stronger, but also just like they influence more of the story. But also, I just want to like go back to Anne Croft. I just want to see her utilized much more because I feel she hasn't done much, and I want to see her used because she, I felt like, was a menace back in the original novel, the 30 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse World. I feel like she was actually a main like character in the sense that she was like the main antagonist for much of that story, which she was. And I would love to see that again. Now, moving on to the meeting with Asmodeus. Pretty much they both agree, Kim Dutchka and Asmodeus, alright, let's work together to kill Michael. Obviously, Asmodeus is like a little like iffy. He's like, maybe should I? But screw it, it might be a trap. Let's just do it still. And so they plan on attacking Michael at a certain time. And pretty much it's got to be Asmodeus bringing in like a bunch of like incarnations, demon kings, and so on, constellations, if possible. And they're all got to be like pretty much jumping Michael. And now we move on to Michael, which Michael was kind of just like sitting around smoking, which this is interesting. Smoking is considered a sin, which I don't know. That seems interesting because this then goes into the future like plot, future ideas about good and evil. What is considered good and what is considered evil? The philosophical question. But that's the issue though. We don't know what it actually means. We can only base it on will be considered good. So if this is not happening, then that means that's bad, which is interesting because you got the physical manifestations, you can say, the ones who carry on the story of the old is good and old is evil, with them being Megatron and Agris, the ruler of the East Hell, Demon King number 2. And that is interesting because too much good can lead to bad. Like, I feel as though like that is like really interesting considering the whole philosophical ideas between good and evil. Continuing about like the good and evil saga is just Megatron accepted that Michael will get hunt due to a revelation that both Kim Dutchka and Yu Sang-ha, both of them basically create a revelation through the fourth wall's like damage, the hole through the fourth wall, so information from the fourth wall can go out to the Starstream. And this revelation basically says that like Michael will die, and it's due to swords, like due to like, I don't know, a master swordsman or whatnot. And he allows it, which is interesting because what he says for the reason why he's letting Michael die is that for the sake of the greater good, they would trample on smaller good every now and then. That is so interesting because that's like hypocrisy. They're saying that like that it's good for the overall good to trample on these small goods that are happening, which is like, that's interesting because I feel as though like having more smaller goods will have a overall bigger good than just having one big good overwhelming the small good, just a singular small good. And this whole entire war is boiling down to stop the disappearance of the old is good and then the old is evil, because there was a time in the Starstream where good and evil didn't exist. Now moving on to the fight with Michael. Basically, Asmodeus comes in, bunch of allies to jump Michael, and as such they follow the revelation that happened, which is to use sword aura. The part of the revelation's like sword stuff, so like master swordsman and stuff will kill the angel, so they use the sword aura, and Lord and behold, it actually does a lot of damage to Michael. Like, Michael was actually slowly struggling, which is interesting because he is basically able to fight a mythic constellation. Like, I'm being honest, he is pretty much a mythic constellation, just barely not. But yeah, so it's due to the second generation, because the second generation had Master Swordsman and 9-tier magician. So if you use those types of abilities, they get enhanced. With Michael taking all this damage and stuff, he then reveals that he's a demon king. He's the demon king of corrupt angels, which this 100% ties him to Lucifer. Because if you think about like the Bible and stuff like that, Michael the archangel that were created from God, and they're both like very high up angels, being like the highest or like the second highest. And that's so interesting how they portray both those great archangels in this one character. Because the reason why he's also Demon King is that he's the good that walks the path of evil to destroy other evil. This is so interesting because this shows the symbiotic relationship between good and evil. There can't be good without evil. They both need each other to exist. Now moving on to Kim Do-shika vs. Michael. Basically what Michael has when he becomes his Demon King form is that he's able to basically deal extra damage. Like his power substantially increases it when facing against those of the evil variety, so like Demon Kings. So Kim Do-shika is barely surviving against Michael, and as such he eats the fruit of Eden, the apple of good and evil, and that basically makes him become back to a constellation, as basically he did the reverse of what happened to Michael, as Michael also ate Eden's apple as an archangel and became a demon, while the reverse happened to Kim Do-shika, who was a demon king but ate the apple and became an angel. So now he's also a constellation. And with the help of that, him being a constellation / angel, he was able to nullify Michael's ability to just deal a bunch more power, strength against those demon kings. And he used what I love, the fragment of Swordmaster, which is the little fragment story he got when he cheated death, pretty much, and was in the garbage area in the demon realm. I love that the use of those little fragments puts you into perspective how both of the authors thought about the story that far ahead. I love it so much. With Michael kind of dying, he didn't really die. He pretty much is now in a cocoon, a cocoon waiting for his reincarnation, pretty much. But with that happening, Kim Do-shika is on the verge of death, like always. And as such, the fruit of good and evil is actually able to influence Kim Do-shika more, since the fourth wall still doesn't have full power, so the fourth wall couldn't fully nullify the effects of the fruit. And I love how the fruit gives a deep dive about Kim Do-shika, about his life, about how he looked at Yujin Yuk as like his entire life. That character was his whole life. And the fruit asks if he's qualified to continue on, not existing, but carry on with his story. The end of all scenarios, the final story. As he has deceived the entire world, relying on the story that he only knows. The fruit is saying how, like, if he's qualified to continue walking on this path, this story that he's walking on, as he's deceived the world, with him deceiving the world, people won't trust him. They will view him negatively, as he wasn't fair. He didn't tell them, oh, he knew about stuff already, and as such. And I love that. I just love how the fruit gives a more deep dive on Kim Do-shika, as it gives him so much more development as a character. now let's get on to the second part of this Middle Island section with the three most important characters, you can say. Han Se-young, Yoo Jin-yuk, and Kim Do-chka. So Han Se-young, it was pretty much scavenging the dead bodies, and notices Kim Do-chka's part of his story of king of a kingless world, which now I'm thinking about it, that's interesting. So constellations, obviously they can bleed blood and stuff, but what they truly bleed are stories, which is so interesting because that looks back into how Kim Do-chka has to have story packets and stuff to heal, as he's a constellation, as they feed on stories, which I find that very interesting, and that's something else I could talk about later on. And I love how she instantly knew it was Kim Do-chka, because that shows the uniqueness in his story, because not many people would have a story similar to this. A king of a kingless world. That's so interesting. And this is around the time where Han Se-young somehow gets predictive plagiarism due to the one from the, I guess, 1853rd term. But that's besides the point. Yoo Jin-yuk also finds Kim Do-chka, and so the three of them are together, just discussing, trying to just become friends again. And Han Se-young was basically saying how Yoo Jin-yuk also deceived everyone like Kim Do-chka, as pretty much Yoo Jin-yuk was telling Kim Do-chka he doesn't like him and stuff like that. It gets way deeper, but as Yoo Jin-yuk actually said that this would be his last regression, he would not regress any further, and that builds on to something he says a little bit from now when they fully become friends and stuff. And Han Se-young, the reasonable one, of course, tells both of them, just talk it out, please. Because I feel like every time Yoo Jin-yuk and Kim Do-chka interact with each other, they both just don't talk. They both just punch each other or do something. Like if you're looking back at the first interaction they had, Yoo Jin-yuk pretty much was going to kill Kim Do-chka. I think the only reason Kim Do-chka is so dense and sucks at communicating or understanding feelings is because he kind of grew up that way, without his parents, without friends. Only the novel kept him going, and so he mirrors some personality traits from Yoo Jin-yuk, who didn't really care about people. He had a shitty personality and just not a good personality at all. And the thing is, though, Han Se-young, of course, love her, my favorite character, she tells Yoo Jin-yuk, if Kim Do-chka didn't really care about anyone, why did he sacrifice? Because Kim Do-chka sacrifices way too much, actually. I don't know why, but he sacrifices so much, and I think he could have sacrificed less if he just is a better communicator. If he and his team actually pushed through certain events, they could have probably overcome some of those events. But Kim Do-chka is no, I'll just sacrifice myself, and that's just how it will be easier. But nothing happened, and Yoo Jin-yuk killed Han Se-young, as Yoo Jin-yuk was going to kill Kim Do-chka, but Han Se-young basically prevents that from happening, and she did not die. Because, somehow both characters forgot. She is the avatar ability, so she just made an avatar, transferred memories. Pretty simple. But after that, both Kim Do-chka and Yoo Jin-yuk fight each other using their stories, their giant stories and stuff like that, with pretty much Yoo Jin-yuk trying to prove, the whole entire point of what Yoo Jin-yuk is doing is to prove that he's not a character by killing Kim Do-chka. And Kim Do-chka can't kill Yoo Jin-yuk, as he was his everything. So the whole fight is just Kim Do-chka trying not to die and trying to tell Yoo Jin-hyuk, I care about you. It isn't like I will throw away everything, everyone, you, my friends, and everything. After all this bickering and fighting with each other, Kim Do-chka finally does something sensible. He introduces himself. Like, actually introduces himself, not lying or anything. Truly who he is as a person. He introduces himself as Kim Do-chka, not the king of a kingless world, not the demon king of salvation. Just someone who is just reading a novel for his entire life and just didn't accomplish much in life and just is a person. And Yoo Jin-hyuk also introduces himself, as they both never have ever had a introduction with each other. He introduces himself as Yoo Jin-hyuk with his blade slowly moved and cut me down. A former regressor. I'm just so happy that they actually introduced each other as who they are. And I love the little part of a former regressor. That means that he is willing to live this entire life of his with Kim Do-chka. He's accepted that there's no point in regressing when he could accomplish what he and his companions wanted, to reach the end of the stories together. And I love that little part of just former regressor. It's so nice, and just I'm happy they finally talked it out. And after that, they made up. Han Soo-young was over there. She's happy that they made up. And it was kind of funny when she went in and saw them again, as Yoo Jin-hyuk was kind of just slapping or just hitting Kim Do-chka for making him eat dirt. And after that, Han Soo-young and Kim Do-chka, they leave together. Yoo Jin-hyuk leaves by himself, like always. And you're probably wondering, where's Anna Croft in all this? Well, she only existed to heal Kim Do-chka a little, and she kind of just vanished. She kind of just left. Kim Do-chka is like, you can go. She's like, no, but in the end, she just left. And so while Kim Do-chka is getting transported to the lobby of the Isle of Reincarnation, he has some one-to-one talk with conversation with Yoo Sung-ha, which she obviously heard everything Kim Do-chka said and stuff. She obviously poked fun, a little playfully and stuff. And I love this interaction between these two, because Yoo Sung-ha, Yoo Sung-ha has read through Kim Do-chka's life. As she's a librarian, she goes through every record of Kim Do-chka. And I love the little talk they have, because it lightens it up. They talk about their life, what their life could have been when the scenarios return to normal, when there's no scenarios, when life goes back to normal, how everyone could just live close by each other. Maybe they both become very good friends, co-workers, and live together together. And I love that. It's so nice. Now that they're at the lobby of the Isle of Reincarnation, it's mostly just Kim Do-chka and Han Soo-young just talking to each other. I love their little interaction, and it's fun. It's fun. It's just Han Soo-young just poking fun at Kim Do-chka, and they're just having a good time, with Han Soo-young saying that she'll think of a name for Kim Do-chka's second modifier, since he needs a modifier for when he's a constellation and one for Demon King, which his Demon King modifier is the Demon King of Salvation. And so that's pretty much what they all did. And one detail that's interesting is that he looks at his phone, and when I was reading, I was wondering why and stuff, and he kept on saying February 15th. And then after a little bit, I realized it's his birthday, which is it's truly interesting because I feel like the concept of birthdays don't exist. Like, now that I'm like thinking through, birthdays never really happened in the novel. Like, no one talked about birthdays or anything, and they kind of just exist. They just go through the flow of time. Obviously, constellations don't need to care about birthdays since, well, they're ancient, but I feel it would be nice if there's a little like celebration and stuff for the little things, the little stories that exist. There's another part that I liked about this section is that Eugene Yuk finally puts his guess on who Secret the Plotter is. He thinks it's Kim Dutchka from the future, and it kind of actually makes sense because Kim Dutchka was never in his previous regressions ever. Kim Dutchka is more or less an anomaly that existed in this regression. Same thing as Han Soo-young, but I feel as though Kim Dutchka has a greater influence than what she had in this regression. And it makes sense because Kim Dutchka also knows what happens like in the future and all that. So that's actually a good theory, but sadly, it's not Kim Dutchka. It's not a future Kim Dutchka. While Eugene Yuk is thinking about that, about who Secret the Plotter is, Kim Dutchka and Han Soo-young both went up to the ruler of the Isle of Reincarnation, Mandala's guardian, or Buddha. And one thing I love the concept of these walls. Buddha has the wall that decides samsara, which samsara is the cycle of life, birth, death, and rebirth, in which suffering beings are trapped. Freedom from it is known as nirvana, which is interesting because I feel like that's just the whole principles of this, of what reincarnation is. Because all these reincarnations are just given birth, dying, and then rebirth. Which all these people were at one point suffering beings. And none of them has been, I guess you could say, broken free, except for those that are Buddhas, or interestingly enough, I think the constellations and like the demon kings, because Buddha kind of references Kim Dutchka as something else, not as like a, I don't know, reincarnator or like whatever Buddha would say. But these concept of these walls, I know that they're a part of the final wall of, I know that I could piece that out with them all connecting with the fourth wall and the other walls. But I feel like it's interesting, the walls, because there's another wall, the unidentified wall, which I don't know how all these walls correlate together. Maybe that's something I'll learn once I get further on with reading it. But as they're interacting, things are becoming too good to be true. Like Buddha's saying that like, oh, I will be gladly to send you friends off to these like certain stories. Because to get on with the participation of the Great War, you have to go through a story. And he's like saying like, I could do this for these couple people from your party. And he's like, that's too good to be true. Constellations aren't normally this nice. They expect something else when helping out with you. And Buddha's like, well, I don't really believe in that and blah, blah, blah. One thing I find interesting, even though this is like very, very short foreshadowing, like it's the next arc, next like section, is that the monk basically says that your stories aren't old enough, which basically how stories kind of work. I don't know, what they're trying to point out is that Kim Dutchka's and company's stories are just too young. They're not old enough. And that's causing their stories to be weaker than other stories. Even though their stories, for example, the Demon Realm Spring, the Torch that swallowed the myth, those stories are just much more like there's higher quality, but the problem is though they don't have the time of existing to increase their power compared to other stories that are much more smaller, but they've existed for a longer time. And so this is foreshadowing for the company that the stories are going to be older through this next mini arc that's going to happen, which is really important because they actually do need the power to even survive in the war. Last note for this section is the fist bump at the end with Han Soo-young. I love that because directly when reading it, it talks about the companionship, how they view each other as companions, true friends and stuff. And I love that because I feel like there's just that dynamic between Yoo Jin-yuk, Han Soo-young, and Kim Do-chka. The three need each other. The author needs its reader, with the reader needing its main character. And the main character is created by the author. Without the main character, there's no reader. Without the reader, there's no author. I love it. It's amazing, just the triangle. Now I'll talk about two arcs that are happening right before the war, and they're both on the main island, as you need to complete this arc to move on to the final battle, which they're both happening on the main island. So the first arc I'll talk about is these are both smaller arcs, with the second one being a very small arc. The first arc I'm going to be talking about is the Kien-6 Archipelago arc, which the whole premise is pretty much it's a sitcom. Basically, the queen, who is Han Soo-young, gets engaged to the first prince of this kingdom, which the first prince is Yoo Jin-yuk. But then the prince betrays the first prince and calls off the engagement pretty much and tries to take over the kingdom and kill the princes and stuff, with the first prince just fleeing away and starting a rebellion. This is all happening before Kim Do-chka even comes into the scenario. And in fact, there are characters, Jung Hee-won and Lee Hee-sung, they both were in the scenario for 50 years. Most of them are here for 50 years. Same thing for Han Soo-young. This helps develop their stories, but also lose their personalities. So throughout the scenario, Kim Do-chka is trying to make the characters remember themselves. So that's another factor that's going into this. And when Kim Do-chka first arrives in the scenario, it's been many years, 50 years since the others have been. The only one that's been here for only a few years is Yoo Jin-yuk, but he didn't get really affected since through all the regressions and stuff. His state of mind is pretty strong. So when Kim Do-chka is here on this scenario, he basically almost gets executed, but gets rescued by Yoo Jin-yuk, and yeah, they go and save everyone. But to go into more detail with this arc, first of all, the arc is mostly controlled by the giant story, which is the same name as the archipelago, the Kien-6 Archipelago, which I find so interesting because it's a giant story that embodies the definition of a story controlling people. Because this story is controlling every person in this nation. Everyone follows what the story wants and stuff, which makes it, in my opinion, kind of sentient. It kind of has its own mind. Even Kim Do-chka, who's trying to go against the story, is having a little problems with it, and I find that really interesting. And with its age, it's pretty strong of a story. Now I'll just talk about the small parts about the arc that I overall enjoyed. First of all, when Kim Do-chka gets saved by Yoo Jin-yuk, the whole thing about the engagement and stuff like that gets revealed, and I like how Do-chka was thinking about dating in the workplace. Never thought about that. Maybe there shouldn't be any dating in the workplace, that whole talking about the workplace. I like that. That's fun because if you think about it, no one has really fallen for each other yet. This arc actually like shows the love relationship between the sword and shield of the Kim Doshita company, Jung Hee-won and Lee Hee-sung. And yeah, I overall like their dynamic, and it's cute. But going back, pretty much to sell this scenario, Han Soo-young, love her. She written up like a little book titled 30 Ways to Survive a Totally Ruined Scenario, which is so funny because it's just the play on words with the original novel, but you could instantly know who made the book because her opinions and like her way of writing when Kim Do-chika was reading the book, I love it because it just sounds so much like her, and it's such a typical thing because she just put her thoughts in the book about what she was thinking and everything, and I love that. And one big thing is this book was mostly just made for Kim Do-chika, as he can read books to appreciate the author. That I love that because that's the interesting thing, because going back to when Kim Do-chika and Han Soo-young first arrived to the lobby, the dynamic from there already was like, I love that because it's pretty much like if she would make a book, Kim Do-chika will be the one that will read it. It could be as long as possible and Kim Do-chika will still read it, and I love that. But now moving on more into the scenario, the twist of this part of the arc, I guess. I like how Han Soo-young is kind of like has like two personalities, like her and then the queen, you could say, Yuri. And that's like interesting because it's going to be difficult to save her, as to basically remove Yuri's consciousness, you have to also kill Han Soo-young. And one big thing is this, Kim Do-chika even came into this thinking, how would Han Soo-young deal with this, as she was a character not from the novel, as Kim Do-chika kind of knows what will happen to the others as they're from the novel. And I guess this is what would have happened, how the two personalities kind of collided together, and with Yuri kind of being able to manipulate the story and actually like talk about like things that you would not expect a character in this role to even understand, which is very interesting. I overall like the Yuri. Like, I like how she was someone who did not want to be tied to the world. She kept on trying to, I guess, avoid the world, in the sense that the world was trying to format her and make her do this, but she didn't want that, so she kept on training, became a master swordsman, became a 9-tier magician to override it. But that kept on making her be more valued in the world, so the world wants her even more and more, which is like, so I love that. It's like, I feel like the world, in the sense the giant story, is just wanting her, just wants to take her, but can't fully grasp her. And that also kind of works with how the giant story is just fighting against the company. The giant story wants the world to fit with what it views. And so a way to, I guess, counteract this is by doing something that Han Soo-young basically said you should not do, because she kind of gave out what to do with the scenario and stuff, and Kim Do-chika, knowing him, doesn't follow and instead does the hidden option of basically the genre for the ending of the story of this, since it's all based on a sitcom, Kim Do-chika's company, which I find that really interesting, because if you think about it, Kim Do-chika is secretly like a genius in this aspect. He's secretly able to create new plot points, create something that many others, like the author, wouldn't even suspect, because that's the reader's job. The reader's job is to read the work of an author, to analyze it, to see what the author could mean, or format other opinions or ideas that even the author couldn't imagine. And that's what happened right here. Kim Do-shka thought of a way to change the genre. Instead of the typical romance or anything like that to get married, Kim Do-shka instead does the Kim Do-shka Company genre with Unbroken Faith, which I love. It's a star relic from all the way at the beginning of the novel. You feel like that this star relic was kind of just added there as kind of like a tool and stuff. And I'm shocked it's still like held up to now. Like, it's crazy how strong it is. And for it to be used here is so cool, as it's the sword of the first ancestor of this archipelago, Julius Kienzix, the legendary Storm King, which I love. And whoever owns the sword is the rightful person to rule the archipelago. And like when they like saved Han Soo-young due to the Unbroken Faith and making it the Kim Do-shka Company genre, it kind of like forced Yuri out and into the back burner, kind of woke in Han Soo-young. But I love how Han Soo-young gets mad, even though she got saved by Kim Do-shka, into saying that you should have just read and followed what I did, and just came mad at him. I love the interaction, so it's fun. And the thing is though, the team kind of, since a lot of the people, for example, the Giant Story didn't accept the genre, they kind of like rebelled, but they were able to convince in the end the Kim Do-shka Company genre and accept that Han Soo-young is their new ruler. And that kind of closes off the Kienzix archipelago arc. And one thing to note is that I love the interaction, the cute little interaction at the end, where Han Soo-young asked Kim Do-shka to be her first reader when she basically creates a novel once all these scenarios end. And I love that, because it shows truly how far they come together, and now they like view each other as just like companions and just friends. Now moving on to the actual war. So for some reason, they made a starting room for the constellations to choose their affiliation, whether they're good or evil, which, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of nice by the Starstream and the Bureau, as I would expect them just to throw them into the war and just like tell them fight. But basically in this lobby, you could also be neutral and not choose a side yet, but I think in the end you have to kind of choose a side, whether you're good or evil, to participate in this war. So when Kim Do-shka and his group from the Kienzix archipelago come, they come with the reincarnators from the archipelago and others, so that's like their little force there. And when they first meet up in the lobby, they meet up with Gyo's first sword, which still love him, and he notices that time has helped him. Like, he feels like a new type of aura, you could say, with the company's stories and stuff, as the 50 years helped with increase in the story's power, I guess, as the longer the story is, the more powerful it gets, I'm assuming. And then it gets into the whole discussion about good and evil and choosing a side. And they both agree, Kim Do-shka and Gyo's first sword, is that they don't like the concept of good and evil. And he fully agrees with Kim Do-shka, just not like choosing for like his story the torch that swallowed the myth, whether it was good or evil. Now, as they're talking, the constellation Heavenly Wind God, which is Pumbek, basically he's one of the strongest from Honbek Nebula, which is the nebula that all the Korean constellations are a part of, and he's just really annoying. He's like saying that like it's bad that the company, Kim Do-shka's company, is making friends with Eden and these other nebulas and like other, I guess, people and stuff that aren't a part of Hombeck and stuff, which everyone gets mad. Like every single constellation around there gets mad and tells him just shut up. And because of that, he whips out the giant story of the nebula to intimidate Kim Do-shka's group as his main plan was to kind of absorb them, as well Kim Do-shika is kind of going crazy with all of his stories. And I really like the imagery that was used with the tree, as the giant story is based off a tree, with the tree originally being like very plentiful, bountiful, very healthy. Now the tree is pretty weak. Kim Do-shika like notices that, as in the novel 30 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, the tree was healthy, and it's due to constellations I'm thinking of just dying, and so as such the giant story just becomes weaker. With the tree being weaker, Kim Do-shika's giant stories and just his stories in general kind of just bully him, and he gets mad but pretty much runs away. Also, I just want to say that the kids and Legion Yi, they are still in Next City during this time. Like, they show up way later in the war to help out, but yeah, that's why they're not gonna participate for a good bit of the war. They only show up around like the mid to end-ish of the war. But now, moving on, after the conflict with the Korean constellations, Dante comes up, basically Dante from Dante's Inferno, also known as the constellation Hell Scribe, and basically tells everyone, choose a side. Like, you guys kind of have to choose a side, and it's bad if you don't. And quoting on him, the hottest place in hell is reserved for those who maintain neutrality in times of moral crisis. It's basically just saying those who are neutral, you guys are the same as those who are sinners. And I feel like the best example, or like a good example, could be a tsunami's happening, and those that don't do anything, who remain neutral and not help out people or anything, they're the same as those who cause pain during the tsunami, like hurting people during the tsunami. You are neutral. You have the capability to help, but you choose not to. But you also have the capability to do harm, which you also choose not to. But I feel as though it's kind of similar, but just a less severe thing than actually like hurting people during the tsunami. Also, when it comes to the reference with Dante's Inferno, I really like that reference. And I don't know, I've read up on Dante's Inferno, the Divine Comedy, although I would not say it's a comedy in modern terms. Maybe back then it might have been. But it's overall really cool, just going through the different circles of hell, seeing the different types of people and what could be considered as a sin or not in that type of story is really cool. And I like that implementation of Dante's Inferno in this novel. Now, moving on to the battlefield, we mostly get shown Uriel just getting jumped by a couple of Demon Kings, as Uriel is going pretty, like, she's pulling out a lot of power and stuff, and is getting jumped by, like, let's see, like 5 Demon Kings. And she's slowly struggling, as 5 Demon Kings alone for a narrative level constellation's kind of tough, even though the constellation's of that good and is effective against Demon Kings. So she needs some help. So Kim Do-shika comes out of nowhere and basically helps her out, kills a Demon King and like shoos away the others. And I like this, how she says that he's the protagonist of the story she's been watching, which I love that, because it's also similar to what Han Soo-young said earlier about him being the protagonist, which I love, because Kim Do-shika never feels himself as the protagonist. He always feels Yoo Jin-hyuk is the protagonist. I love how Uriel views Kim Do-shika as the protagonist instead of Yoo Jin-hyuk, who was technically the protagonist of the original novel, and now Kim Do-shika is the protagonist of this novel. Another thing to note is that it took me this long to realize that the Demon Kings are based off the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is just a very old book about demons. And I knew before it was based off of that, but what I mean is that the rankings, like the first is Ball, second is Agarus, and so on. I didn't know that all these Demon Kings were exactly ranked at that. And I thought originally it was meant to be based on whether they're the king, prince, knight, president, and so on, not like based on the numbers in the book. Now with Uriel being saved, we could transition on to Megatron, who pretty much is just vibing and just getting updates on what's happening with the battlefield and the other constellations and stuff. Basically, his updates include just being told that like the different nebulas, like the major nebulas, like Vedas, Olympus, Asgard, Emperor, are wanting to participate in the war. And this actually is interesting because I'm like thinking not as many constellations are participating as I thought. Well, actually a lot of the constellations are participating, but I feel like there's still like a good chunk that have not like participated yet. And they're going to participate in the future, as at that point they kind of do. Like for example, Sun Wukong, he's going to participate much further up ahead as there's a huge need. But I also feel like those constellations that have reached the final scenario, I still don't understand why they just don't care. Like this is a very influential scenario that like pretty much kind of dictates most of the star stream, as most of the major constellations that we have heard about are participating, like Uriel, the Black Abyssal Flame Dragon, and so on. So many constellations that we viewed at the beginning as mythical divine beings are here participating with us equal footing. Then there's a little spark of interesting is that basically Michael asks Megatron if he could like fight Agarus and stuff. And I find that really interesting because Megatron basically told him like don't. But that gives like an interesting what if. What if Michael versus Agarus were to happen? One is a mythic constellation, Agarus, and the other is someone that's very close to being a mythic, but is very strong against Demon Kings, as when he transforms into his Demon King form, he gets a boost of power and can pretty much overpower Demon Kings pretty fast. Like, he destroyed Osmodeus. Osmodeus almost died, and that was when Osmodeus had a bunch of other Demon Kings with him, and Osmodeus is probably the most ambitious Demon King we've seen, which he's strong, and that's how he gets through with all of his ambitions and stuff. But I don't know, I think Michael would lose, but I feel like it would be like a good fight. It would be a good fight. It's just Michael is Eden's weapon, pretty much a ever-living weapon, and I think that's how Megatron thinks that the story of good will always last, because I feel like Michael just doesn't die. Whenever his like incarnation body gets destroyed, he basically just gets reborn, and I find that just interesting because that's kind of like a consistent way to keep good. But the issue is this: whenever there's good, there always has to be evil. Now we move on to the team, the main characters again. What they're going for is chaos points. Basically, what chaos points are is a special type of point that the Dokkaebes kind of just added. Pretty much there's 3 main points for this battle. There's the good points, evil, and chaos points. And the way it's set up is there's mini battles, so like small little conflicts happening throughout the area, and you could choose to participate in the battles to hopefully win and gain points for your side. So for example, in battle 15, the good side wins. That good side will gain 1 point for their team. And I think it doesn't get shown later on, but I think if it's like 80 or if it reaches a certain point limit, it will just become a full-scale attack, pretty much, with good and evil. Because it gets boring if it's just like little conflicts happening here and there. But what the team is going for, chaos points, basically the battles have to have no winners or losers. Which, this kind of, it's interesting in the sense that later on, it then says that the way chaos points work is good versus good, that's a chaos point. Evil versus evil, that's a chaos point. Which I feel like is interesting, but also weird in the sense that it's kind of slightly different with the no winners or losers. Because how does that even quantify as happening? Because do you just say, oh, I surrender and stuff? And so as such, there's no winners or losers in that point. So I'm not too sure. But basically, due to increasing chaos points, Kim Do-chika reveals that they're trying to awaken the Apocalypse Dragon, which the Apocalypse Dragon is the final dragon of Revelation. Basically, it's the dragon that appears in the Book of Revelation in the Bible, which I will discuss a lot about that later on when we get more information about the Dragon of Revolution in this arc. And I love it. I love that inclusion of the Dragon of Revelation. Because there's so many different, I guess, inspirations from the different mythologies throughout the world. The Norse mythologies, the Greek mythologies, and so on. So many have just been, inspired from by the two creators, by the two authors. And I love it. After basically Kim Do-chika explains his plan to everyone present, Kim Do-chika kind of just dips, just leaves the scenario pretty much. He'll go to his parents, so he's like, go to the underworld. So while that's happening, Han Soo-young and Yoo Jin-yuk are just basically discussing about Secretive Plotter, as they're just talking about who they think Secretive Plotter is. And they kind of just like boil him down as being a very, very powerful constellation or being, because he can influence so much, like so many places or like events that have happened that many other higher level constellations, they can't even like touch it, and yet Secretive Plotter can just like vibe and do whatever he wants. And they also think about how he knows all of Yoo Jin-yuk's regressions, all of his regressions, what has happened to him, and so on. Which then goes down into what they both think Secretive Plotter is, as they both think that he's someone different. Yoo Jin-yuk, of course, says he's Kim Do-chika from the future, while we, the reader, would not give him what Han Soo-young thought. And that is because she's correct. And I guess I will say it now, since I know who Secretive Plotter is now. It's Yoo Jin-yuk. It's just another Yoo Jin-yuk. It then goes into a whole thing. It's the Yoo Jin-yuk from the original novel, 30 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. There's another thing I just want to say. Where is the first Demon King, Baal? Like, I feel like he's just kind of just gone. Like, it's been stated that he's just one missing, and Agris became the leader of the Demon Kings, pretty much, as the ruler of the East Hell, the second ruler, and whatnot. And where, like, I don't know where, I feel like having Baal here would be so important, because he's basically the Megatron of the Demon Kings, but he's kind of just missing. And I don't know, even after reading through, I still don't know where he is, pretty much. So it would be good to know where he is, or if he even exists. Baal missing and stuff. Agris is kind of just there, being the ruler. But now Megatron and Agris just team up, which is just mean. Having two of the biggest factions of this war team up against Kim Do-chika and his crew, the probably smallest nebula here, and arguably the weakest, weakest in the constellation eyes. while them in reality is actually like very strong due to their stories. Like the two giant stories they have easily are like insane, and then the mythic story of Hell's Eternity, that is actually insane. Uses Kim Do-chka is able to use the abilities of the Yujin Yuk that he could read up to, and that's insane. Now moving on to where Kim Do-chka went. He went to the underworld to get its army pretty much from Hades and Persephone. Overall, that's what happens. But there's like a lot of different parts in this small section that I just love so much. First, when he went to the underworld, he was greeted by the judges, the 3 narrative level constellations, and the souls of the dead. And I love how Kim Do-chka just quoted this: "I had never been treated this warmly before in my life." I love it because it shows so much about how the underworld is his home now. You could say, like, he feels comfort here as both of his parents, Hades and Persephone, act like his actual parents. He feels the warmth of his parents now due to them. So now we move on to Persephone and Hades treating Kim Do-chka like their son. I love that because basically what they do is Persephone asks one of the judges to formulate a list of potential candidates. As Kim Do-chka goes to the throne, he sees Persephone there with his child, and Persephone basically saying that since I have a grandchild now, shouldn't you have a mate? And then the judge comes out and starts listing the potential candidates, with Yu Sung-ha being number 1 and Han Sung-yu being number 2. I love that. It's just such a parent thing to do. Just trying to, I guess, find a potential suitor or potential mate for your child. I love that because that kind of reflects how maybe like in Asian households, I don't know about Korean households, but in general, Asian households do that, where parents kind of like try to find someone for their child. I love that. This is just a random thought I was thinking about during this section. Where's Loki? I feel like Asgard hasn't been like a huge influence apart from like Thor from the Gourmet Association arc. I feel like Asgard just hasn't been doing much. I know Loki did the whole thing of turning Yujin Yuk into a female for like a moment, but like apart from that, Loki's kind of just been vibing and just like yapping his stuff. I know he has some like relevance later on, but I don't know, we haven't even seen him or anything. He's mostly just been there. But either way, moving back on to the interactions with Persephone and Kim Do-chka, they go back to where they first met at the dining table. And I love that little interaction they have at the dining table again, because Persephone just wishes that her son isn't picky with food, wishes that he got over it and stuff. And they like talk like parents, like a mother and son. I love that. And also one big thing is this: why doesn't Kim Do-chka like eat any of the stories? Like, I understand beforehand when he first got there he didn't eat because he didn't want to be forever trapped in the underworld, but he's a constellation now. Shouldn't that be different? Isn't him eating these stories the same thing as consuming story packs? I wonder. I wonder why he doesn't eat these. But either way, the interaction they have is such a motherly and son type of relationship. I love it because Kim Do-chka never had that relationship with his actual mother. He always viewed his actual mother coldly and just didn't really like her. Another thing that Persephone said is that, are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating enough? And I love that. That's just something that parents would tell their child, even when they become an adult, which Kim Do-chka is an adult, obviously, would say, because they care about their child. The child is their everything. And like during the talk at the table, Persephone says that since you want the army of the underworld, you have to stay here at the underworld to be its true successor and stuff. And Kimdochka understands that. But Persephone says that really you don't have to. Me and Hades don't want to tie you down to things like this. We just want you to be free. I love that. The way they just tell him that we do not want you to be tied down to this. Because that's something like parents would do. Like a true like loving parent would not want to tie their child down to whatever they must have to. They want their child to experience things. They want their child to do things that they want, not to be forced down on whatever. And that makes them different to the Olympians, as that's what Poseidon and Zeus probably and have done, just force stuff upon their children. They also talk about how all stories come to an end. For example, the story of the underworld. Although it may be a rich, beautiful, long story, it too will come to its end. And with it coming to an end, both Hades and Persephone will cease to exist, which Kimdochka doesn't want them to disappear, which even he is shocked. He is shocked that he's feeling these types of feelings of not wanting both Hades and Persephone to just vanish. And I love that because it shows that Kimdochka has truly accepted them as parents. Obviously, in the past, he's called them mother or father, but those could just be like him not truly expressing or him actually expressing. But in this type of scene, in these scenes, he's just truly just accepted them as his actual parents. And during this conversation, we learn about the main reason why both Hades and Persephone originally were very, interested in Kimdochka. It's because years ago they had a revelation, a prophecy from the prophets of Olympus that basically say that they will have a child, which is interesting because Persephone has the story that she can't bear a child. The story restricts her from having a child, which at first confused the couple, but then they noticed Kimdochka when he first went through the first scenario. They watched Kimdochka, the small star that would fight the world, and that's what truly made them fall in love with Kimdochka, wanting him to be their child. She then says this quote, which I just love so much. "We also do not wish for you to be bound to us, and do not wish for the lives we've lived, our history, to become the rules that you must abide by. No, all you need to do is to advance forward towards the end of all scenarios, like you've been doing all along." And Kimdochka says no, tries to rebuttal and just tell her like no, but then she says, "You're our son. That is all that matters." And I love that so much. The parents are willing to sacrifice everything just for their child, just for their child's dream, what their child wants. They're willing to do whatever they can to make that possible. And even if they have to sacrifice themselves, they will make their child happy and make their child follow their dreams. To end this section, the small section, Hades shows Kimdochka the army that he's going to give him, and just reading those couple lines it gave me chills. It was so empowering and I loved it. It showed the affection and everything, and how Hades and Persephone truly love Kimdochka. Now moving back to the war, the plan that Agris and Megatron had is working, as they're just stacking up their good and evil on each side of the battlefield for the different small little battlefields. And during this time, Hansu Young gets ditched by Eugene Yuk, classic, to go after Anna Croft, as he notices her at a battlefield, and their relationship's always been rocky, so that's it makes sense. And instead, Han Se-young gets help from Osmodeus. So mainly, Anna Croft knew that she's screwed, so she kind of like was able to use Yoo Jin-yuk to help her fight against the constellations and Asgard. As previously stated, Anna Croft kind of is not in good terms with Asgard anymore. They just kicked her out, so that happened. And a lot of powerful constellations are now like coming into the battle against Yoo Jin-yuk. So you got the Black Wolf, God of Death, Anubis, and the God King of Thunderbolt, Indra, who is stated to be the king of the eight Lokapal, which they're pretty much comparable to the 12 gods of Olympus. And Indra is stated to be just under the three main gods of Vedas. The three of them basically fight against each other, Anubis and Indra versus Yoo Jin-yuk. And Yoo Jin-yuk is kind of getting destroyed as well. Indra is a very high level class narrative great constellation. So to be able to beat him, he recalls his memories from seeing the fight against Hades and Poseidon and decides to copy the two techniques of those mythic great constellations and basically becomes a star to destroy Indra. He uses breaking these guys' swordsmanship techniques of inner mysteries and split the dark ocean to pretty much destroy Indra, although he uses so much of his power and transcendence that his body is rendered practically on the verge of death, pretty much useless. But the thing is though, the technique that he used is insane because Kim Do-shka recalls that the technique is a technique that he uses much further up ahead in his regressions, and it's like a technique that this version of Yoo Jin-yuk should not be able to use, as it's just way too much power for his body currently, and his leg gets destroyed, like it gets completely just not vaporized, but completely just destroyed because of the overload of power. So when Kim Do-shka comes back with the army of the underworld, he sees Yoo Jin-yuk practically on the verge of death. So he asks Anna Croft, since she has the ability to absorb any healing item, and it's basically in her blood, so she can like use her blood to heal. And so Kim Do-shka and her basically work together to reattach his leg by using one of Kim Do-shka's squid stuff. We're getting back to Squid Do-shka. Basically, it was during like some sales or whatever with the mass production maker, and he was just given it as it was like some rare reward, and it's the tentacle of a kraken, I think, and they use that with Anna Croft's ability to give Yoo Jin-yuk his leg back. But no, the whole fight between Yoo Jin-yuk and Indra was so hype. Just reading that just gave me a sense of like adrenaline. It was such a good read. Such a good fight. Oh yeah, just going back to the squid, I felt like it was just random, like very random that Kim Do-shka just randomly had that tentacle, and it kind of felt like a plot device. Obviously it makes sense, they explained it and stuff, but I don't know, it just felt a little bit random, and it's fine. Not shockingly, Indra, being stubborn, comes back using a lot of probability and comes equipped with his star relic, Vidra, which is just thunderbolts, pretty much. It's like the Zeus equivalent for thunderbolts, you can say. And they're screwed in the sense that Kim Do-shka kind of has to step up to fight Indra. And this time Indra brings out, I think, even greater power than when he was fighting against Yoo Jin-yuk. So Kim Do-shka has to go all out also, using his two giant stories that he already has. The giant story of the Demon Realm Spring and the giant story of the Torch that swallowed the myth, plus two stories that were supporting him. So the Kansas Archipelago and the Underworld. giant stories to basically fight Indra. That was basically overpowering his body with the strongest weapon, probably. What the strongest weapon in Omniscient his Viewpoint stories. He is able to produce power pretty much similar to what Yujin Yuk did when using his shooting star slash, and basically destroys Indra. Same thing as Yujin Yuk. But the main issue is this: Vedas is mad, Asgard is mad, a lot of constellations and nebulas are kind of mad at how Kimdochka comes with the underworld, as the underworld is meant to be a smaller nebula controlled by Olympus and stuff. But I love this because Kimdochka says that his parents will get very terrifying when they get mad, and Persephone of course agrees because supporting her son, this then like causes a conflict since the underworld should not be here in this fight and Kimdochka should not be using their powers. So Asgard, the army of Asgard, is still there, is ready to topple over Kimdochka and stuff. But Loki, this is when I said Loki actually becomes somewhat relevant, comes in and basically tells all the gods of Asgard to not fight. He basically convinces them, and I think Thor even pitches in and helps out Loki. And in the end, Asgard becomes allied with Kimdochka. Well, not allied yet. It's more or less just neutral with Kimdochka. So that's one good thing. And also, I'm like thinking about the like Loki's modifier, the constellation who likes to change gender. And it took me like a little bit, but I started remembering that Loki, in one of the myths revolving about Loki, how he basically gave birth to a horse. So that, I guess that kind of correlates with his modifier at that point. But also he's known to be a shapeshifter, so he could be a man or a woman. So I guess that kind of makes sense with his powers and like his history, that's his modifier. I don't know, it's just something interesting that I just like thought about when I was reading at this part. While that is all happening, around the same time is the fight with Hansu Young and Asmodeus versus the different archangels. So during that fight, Hansu Young knows that she can't fight all these archangels as they're pretty like strong constellations and stuff. So she has to be cringy and use Half Advent with the black abyssal flame dragon, and she has to say a bunch of cringy lines, which is pretty fun because she's kind of just like she's hating herself so much, but she does a Half Advent, and when she accomplishes that, the power that she gains from it is crazy. With one of the archangels, Master of the Ark, Noah, being over here shivering, which Noah actually becomes very relevant later on in this arc, which I did not expect, but I should have expected, because this kind of plays out like stuff in the Bible. So while Noah over here is shivering, I was like thinking about how the abyssal black flame dragon obviously is counted as one of the strongest candidates among the different dragons that try to become the dragon of Revelation or the Apocalypse dragon. But I like how they added that, just having a bunch of dragons, as compared to the Bible and stuff. There's really only one dragon, and that's known as to be Satan and stuff, which is like interesting because this adds more variety and like a little like conflict that happens during the Dragon Festival. I like that addition, a little changing things up from the Bible and stuff. Moving back to Hansu Young, best character. I'll still say I love her. But either way though, moving back to Hansu Young, she's being schizophrenia. She's saying like multiple things at once. It's kind of just like the voices in her head and stuff like that. Yeah, she's having like disorganized thinking and hallucinations and stuff. One thing I noticed is that Asmodeus hasn't been like doing much. He wasn't really like stated to be doing a whole lot during this battle. I know that he's easily like holding his own and stuff, but that's one thing I'm like felt was interesting. It probably just like maybe shows that he's a bit more, I guess, shady, and it's going to like do something cunning and stuff later on in the arc. That's what I'm assuming. But with Hansu Young and her half advent, she's kind of just like causing a lot of destruction, fighting the angels and stuff. And so Uriel steps up, fights Hansu Young, and I love the little like bickering they have later. How, I don't know, they both treat each other as like friends, you could say, both the black abyssal flame dragon and Uriel. But Uriel, of course, really, I like her. I like her, as does many others. Really good. I don't know, she's just a nice character. And so she's confused. She doesn't really like want to fight Hansu Young, as she's known her from the start pretty much. And she's one of the friends of her incarnation and someone that she values a lot, Kim Dochka. And so in the end, Hansu Young being badly damaged, as she kind of just went nuts and just fought a bunch of Valkyries, angels, and stuff like that. Uriel decides to help her and join Kim Dochka's side. Now with Hansu Young being saved by Kim Dochka and Uriel joining this side, we now can move on to Jung Hee-won and Lee Hee-sung, the toughest shield and sharpest sword of the Kim Dochka company. With their story, which I just like the story since it just facilitates more into both of them being together. The story of Sword and Shield. Basically what's happening on their side is that Reincarnators, the army that they brought with them, is kind of just being toppled down by the Demon Kings and the Demon Army, as they're pretty much fighting against 7th grade Demonkind, a Dark Warrior. And with the Dark Warriors comes with 5 Demon Kings, which is kind of insane because the average Demon King is a narrative level constellation. Some of them may be very weak narrative level, but as you get higher up into the ranks of the Demon Realms, they get just progressively stronger. So for example, what they're facing right now is the Master of the 58th Demon Realm, President of Flames, Amy, the Master of the 48th Demon Realm, Golden Horned Ox, Haganity, the Master of the 36th Demon Realm, Silver Clawed Owl Stolas, and then 2 others that are just way out of the 2's reach, especially Jung Hee-won, as she told previously to Kim Dochka, basically saying, which Demon Kings can I fight? Kim Dochka says, you could fight up to around the 30th rank. Afterwards, just don't fight those higher than like 20, as you're probably not gonna win. So then the 2 other Demon Kings that are left over are the Master of the 16th Demon Realm, Demon King of Seduction and Infertility, Zepar, and then a Master in the 10s, well, in the single digits, the Master of the 8th Demon Realm, Merciless Hunter Against the Will of the Heavens, Barbatos, which I overall like the description they have for Barbatos, as he's a Demon King with a cowboy-style hat and carrying a rifle that was like smiling through its cascading blonde hair, which I just find that description just like very like fun, as he's just like cowboy. He's just a cowboy guy and just vibing around. True America right there. But that's just a fun description they have for a very like strong Demon King. So with the odds stacked heavily against our main characters, of course, they still try to fight. So Jung Hee-won tries to use her Out of Judgment, but guess what? Even though there's Demon Kings clearly in front of her that are considered evil, those of the absolute good constellations say no, she can't use it pretty much. And that's the interesting hypocrisy that is involved with this, as this goes back to the quote that Megatron said, that for the greater good, for the overall greater good to exist, the goods of the small can be removed, which is so hypocritical, because it's just saying that like all good is just useless. That means only the overall greater good is better than having the smaller good still be existing. And the Demon Kings, of course, are just making fun of her, saying that, like, all her angels and stuff, they don't really care about her anymore and just want to win this war, which is just pettiness also. So as soon as she realized I can't do anything, they start retreating. But as they're retreating, many reincarnates are just dying, and it's just a bloodbath, pretty much. But Kyle Brett, who was a Guardian Knight that like served with Jung Ki-won during the Kien 6 Archipelago arc, when she was a knight there, pretty much went and tried to fight to save time, pretty much, to give more time to the reincarnates retreating, and gets instantly just destroyed by the Demon Kings, but does put up somewhat of a good fight. I respect that a lot. A true Chad. And when Kyle Bird was fighting, she had thoughts racing through her head on what to do. So she thought of the three main people, Kim Do-chka, Yoo Jin-yuk, and Han Soo-young, and thought about what they would have done, which I find it really interesting because it fits perfectly. She just knows them so well. She thought about how Han Soo-young would be like, just use Kyle Brett as a shield and stab the Demon King, while Yoo Jin-yuk would try to save the people but know that it won't. However, it may not be possible to save the people, but he knows that they will regress, so it's fine, as they're reincarnators, so they just get reincarnated back. And then she was thinking about Kim Do-chka saying that he would try to save them, but he will know that he will probably die or something bad will happen to him in the process. While she's thinking through all that, she decides on, in the end, just going to Kyle Brett and to try to save him. With her knowing what she wants to do, Lee Hee-seong also tries to help her, and it's actually crazy. Like, what he does to buy time for her is, first of all, stopping the advance of the Golden Ox, and then catching the spear that was thrown by Amy with his teeth. And even when he was like basically torched alive through heat that even melted his tongue and basically fried his eyes, he just endured it with nothing more than his unyielding, indomitable spirit, which is insane. The true shield of the Kim Do-chka company. And he even took shots from Barbatos, which those shots were so strong that they actually started to damage his constellation, the Master of Steel. After saving Kyle, she basically runs away and hides, thinking about what to do in this chaotic situation. And I like this little like use thing. All the reincarnates are doing what happened to Kim Do-chka back in the Revolution arc. Basically, all of the reincarnates are calling themselves the different members of the Kim Do-chka company, and that kind of like helped her finally understand what's the point of absolute good or evil when they decide on what is good or what is bad. Not that she herself can decide on what is good or bad in the given situation. Why can't she decide on her own? And with how the power system, I guess, works in the Star Stream, misfortunes and stories do help her. Like, misfortunes create new stories, new, more developed, advanced stories, which then those stories help, like, develop her more and help her awaken her new attribute, you can say, basically evolve her attribute to becoming the judge of destruction. Although I feel like a better name would be Judge of Apocalypse, in my opinion. I don't know, to me it just feels just better than the Judge of Destruction. The lines that were written when she became the Judge of Destruction I overall love. Quote, "The one who shrunk away once upon a time became judge of evil in order to pass judgment on all the evils she's encountered. In that case, what would happen to the judge who was betrayed by good. I don't need their stupid consent anymore, said Jung Ki-won. Now neither good nor evil. We decide who will be judged from now on. Basically, as she became the judge of destruction, she still has the similar power of gaining a lot of power when people basically agree upon when to use their power. And this time, the people that agree on are people that are a part of her nebula, the Kim Do-chka company. So with all that power, her stories pretty much transcend the scenario's probability for the next couple minutes. And I like to say this is the power of chaos. As her hair turns white and she gives off basically the power of chaos, you can say, like the vibes of chaos and stuff like that, which fits with her whole destruction aspect. That's kind of why I like the Judge of Apocalypse more than Judge of Destruction. And when she was going to use this power to basically destroy the Demon Kings, she referenced the three main people, Kim Do-chka, Han Seo-young, and Yoo Jin-yuk, and quoting, she summoned forth her courage like Kim Do-chka, and you shouldn't be wielding it like that, and swung her sword exactly like Yoo Jin-yuk, slice, sword of judgment, sliced into a part of Barbatos's forearm. In that moment, she thought she heard Han Seo-young's laughter. You know this too, right? The last one to laugh is the winner. And she pretty much destroys Barbatos with Zepar escaping from the scenario. And the other three Demon Kings also got destroyed. And she said also, I like this because this quote that I'm going to say relates to the Code of Harmanbiri, which I overall love this connection. If you want my bones, I shall give them to you. If you want my heart, then I'll gladly hand it over. And I love it because it reflects what the part of the code was. Basically, if a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. Which relates to the whole thing of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I overall love that. And it's also, this code is also referenced in the Bible, which helps, I guess, facilitate more about this war, which this war kind of relates to, you could say maybe the war between hell and heaven. Basically the war of Lucifer versus God, which I feel like it has some connection to, some portrayals, but overall isn't the same thing. But in the end, she still couldn't kill Barbatos as her timer for Judge of Destruction / Sword of Judgment came to an end. So she's pretty much very weak, but Barbatos is also very weak, but she couldn't deal the final blow. So guess who comes in and saves her and basically helps out? The kids and Lee Ji Ye with the ship, as basically Barbatos escapes to his own ship, the Nighthawk, and it basically becomes a ship fight against the Dragon Turtle and Nighthawk. The Dragon Turtle that Lee Ji Wei is using also has the giant story backing it up, the giant story of Next City, and in the end, they pretty much destroy the 8th ranked Demon King, Barbatos, as well. Barbatos being very weakened, fighting against 3 people that have fully held up with a star relic that was commissioned as a star relic that the Martin War God commissioned, which the Martin War God is a narrative level constellation. So in the end, it makes sense that Barbatos kind of got clapped at the end. That small little battle in the end kind of sums up the small little battles, as now they're going to progress onto the whole scale battle with all the different nebulas joining in, Eden joining in. And when Eden joins in, I find this so hypocritical. They give sympathy to Jung Ki-won as for not helping her and stuff, but in the end she survived. And of course, she's pissed because while you guys over here just stood around and just watched me suffer, you guys had the ability to give me the power to fight the Demon Kings, but in the end, you didn't. And while that's happening, everyone else is kind of just joining in. All the big hitters, the leaders of good and evil, and in the crossfire, in the center of it all, the Kim Do-chika company. Now it's time for the big battle. But before we talk about the big battle, we're going to have to talk about what Midala's guardian, Sakeumi, is basically talking about to Sung Yuha. Basically, what the Buddha is talking about is just about how in the past, as this is a really old constellation, how I think about it, about how in the past, good, evil, and neutral parties work together to defeat or seal the apocalypse, the Dragon of Apocalypse, which now I'm thinking about is foreshadowing for future events, for the end of this arc. And another thing that the Buddha was talking about is constellations, how they can't really sleep, or it's like very hard to sleep. Like for example, when the whole entire Kim Do-chika company was trying their best to get Kim Do-chika to sleep, they used a bunch of different abilities, consumables, and everything to get Kim Do-chika even a day of sleep. As after he became a constellation, or even after the scenarios even started, no one really got full sleep, and especially Kim Do-chika. But the Buddha then talks about how constellations look away from death, since they don't really know what true death is, as long as their main body isn't destroyed, or they still have stories, they don't really die. As like to kill a constellation, they have to fully incarnate into the scenario, or they pretty much run out of stories, or their stories just completely bleed out, pretty much. And as such, they mistakenly believe that there will be a story that can save them. So you could think about like the final scenario, maybe. Like those that are trying for the final scenario, like Asmodeus, who heavily want it. That could be like their last story, the story that they're trying to get to save them from this hellscape. And the Buddha then says that the way reincarnators and constellations are, they're both different. With how reincarnators, they understand that nothing will change. No matter how much they reincarnate, how much they die and come back, there will always be a scenario. Which I find that really interesting because it's mostly two different viewpoints of two, I guess, beings that just don't die. Constellations, those who crave stories, crave for potential in the future. And then there's reincarnators who have already accepted this, I guess, current timeline and their future pretty much, of how they will never achieve what they truly want, and that's due to the scenarios always happening. Now moving back to the war, Kim Do-chika's company is kind of vibing, just waiting on who makes the first move. With Lee Hee-seung pretty much dead, kind of. He's not dead yet. He still has a pulse and everything. It's just he's out of commission, pretty much. It's mostly because his attribute is evolving, and it's going to take a while for his attribute to evolve. He's pretty much done for the arc. Then, there's one thing I was interested in, is that Lee Gi-young's sponsor was asking to help out and stuff, which I'm interested in because I'm wondering who is his sponsor, and also when did he get the sponsor? I'm very confused about that, and it's not even stated at the end of the arc, so I don't know. But since the main war is between good and evil, Kim Do-chika's company is kind of just vibing, and so pretty much without the main attention to their group, they reveal that they have the backing of the underworld and Asgard to everyone, and somehow everyone's shocked. I don't know why everyone's shocked when clearly we've seen that the underworld has been helping them so much, for example, supplying them with an army. And then Asgard makes sense as a little shocker, because at first they were against each other, then they were neutral, and now they're allies. So that's interesting. I think it's mostly because Anna Croft kind of like helps out with that, as Asgard still wants Anna, I think, considering I think they vibe with each other somehow. But yeah, so Anna Croft is now with the group for the time being, and she is confused with the shenanigans that the group's doing, as she doesn't really understand why Han Soo-young is doing this, Yoo Jin-yuk is doing this, and Kim Dutchka is doing this. They're all kind of just vibing, and Anna Croft is an outsider, just confused on what the dynamic. And this is around the time when we talk about Jang Ki-young, how basically Kim Dutchka just want to live her own life, since he created her. So yeah, that's kind of like a random thing there, not really correlating yet, but it'll be relevant later. But pretty much, since the company made themselves more visible with them saying that they're being backed up by 2 nebulas, everyone's ready to jump the company pretty much. But then that's when they realize the chaos points have reached 80. So pretty much, yeah, what I said before, the battle, it's not much of a battle, kind of very short and just ended due to the chaos points. And this is what I was also thinking. If any side reached chaos points, then how does that even work? I think once one side reached like 80, then, for example, if good reached 80, what would happen? I'm curious about that. But since chaos points reached 80, the countdown to apocalypse has begun. Pretty much, chaos points will increase by 1 point every 30 minutes. And also, if conflicts happen, so good versus good, evil versus evil were to happen, then chaos points will also increase through that. So the original way to increase them. And now we get a little bit more information about the Apocalypse Dragon, with it basically being able to kill at least a quarter of the constellations when revived, which I feel like that's interesting, because in the Book of Revelation, it was stated that a third of the stars of the sky will fall. So does that mean that the Apocalypse Dragon in Omniscient Readers is just weaker than the Apocalypse Dragon in the Bible? I'm not too sure, because it's also thinking about how the Apocalypse Dragon is a calamity of the star stream, so there's much more influence compared to the biblical counterpart of it. So I'm not too sure. And it's also the case that the dragon would have taken the dragon some time to regain some power, as it just got out of being sealed. So I don't know. Now everyone is pretty much waiting for the chaos points to reach 90, since that's when the Apocalypse Dragon will start reviving. But it seems like there's someone or a group of people that are increasing the points much more faster. And pretty much the group that's doing it is the Seekers of the End. They're pretty much the prophets from all the way at the beginning of the novel, the prophets that Han Soo-young led. Those who read pages of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. And these Seekers of the End are just the Constellation versions or the Demon King versions, as they're pretty much more stronger, and that allows them to do much more drastic actions like summoning the Apocalypse Dragon. And then, interesting enough, they believe that there's only one story that has supported this world, and every scenario is the will of that story. And that's interesting, because the story they're referencing is the original novel, the 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, which that's interesting, because how would they already know the information about that novel? I understand that there's been many things like the revelations, the fourth wall breaking, so information about the novel has been outsourced and stuff, but I don't know, that's one thing I find interesting, because they say that one story is the pillar of this world, which I feel like is kind of false, because there's many stories that are the pillars of the world. And I feel like the different walls could also be maybe pillars of the world, you can say, as all the walls collectively each have their own type of thing. So for example, the wall that divides good and evil, this whole entire conflict, the giant story of the Great War of Saints and Demons. Then there's the Wall of Samara, which is the whole reincarnation type wall. And then the fourth wall, which exists and stuff. So I don't know, I feel like there's more than one story that actually holds the world together. And due to the Seekers of the End, the 90 chaos points were pretty much attained very fast. And due to that, there was a quick meeting with both sides of good and evil. It's pretty much just like a big spear in the middle of like the battlefield. And they're basically like talking about what to do and stuff. And one thing I love is that during the meeting, Megatron doesn't have an answer to what is good. Because, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because I feel like good is a type of idea that doesn't have one thing with it. There's multiple things. And it's explained through it saying that good is a collection of stories. Which is kind of true because there's many things that could be considered good. But are they good? We're not too sure because it's based on what you, the person, view as good. It's more subjective, you can say. And then there's the whole thing about how evil exists because of good. So whatever is not considered good could be considered evil, which that goes into another rabbit hole, which is interesting because it then goes on to say that the good stayed alive by punishing the evil, while the evil continued to exist by resisting against the good. It's just, it brings back to the original idea of that I've been saying, is that good and evil both need to exist to have each other to exist very much. Without good, there can't be evil. Without evil, there can't be good. And while they're in the spear, pretty much the chaos points increase once they reach 90. That's when everyone was like alerted. And guess who caused this to happen? Megatron. Which is interesting because I knew that he was affiliated with the Seekers of the End, considering that he's the scribe of heaven. He knows the future events due to the archangel that went to the 1863rd turn, but he basically caused the Seekers of the End to increase the chaos points. He wants to awaken the Apocalypse Dragon, which, yeah, but I don't know if it's the correct way, because in his eyes, it's the correct way to do it, but then later on, he regrets it. And then due to that being revealed, Megatron basically sent Michael to kill the different archangels here in the spear, which then correlates to Michael being the one to bring the end of Eden, which is cool and all, but like, I don't think it's the correct way or anything. And the thing is though, this whole entire war was in the end a battle between stories, the stories of good, the absolute good, and the absolute evil, which obviously then goes to the broader perspective of how everything's revolving about stories. But yeah, during this also, Osmodeus, who is working with Megatron, attacks Agris. Agris gets injured a bit, but he's still fighting. He's still alive and stuff, even though he got sneak attacked and stuff. But yeah, now moving outside of the spear, with all this happening, pretty much the Apocalypse Dragon coming to existence and stuff, the Beirut basically sends Dokubase to give Kim Dochka what he wants, the final scenario. Pretty much, the Bureau kind of understands the importance of Kim Dochka and basically gave him a deal on to go to the final scenario right now or don't and just die here, which I find interesting because then I'm thinking about, to reach the final scenario, you need to complete a certain set of things, which Kim Dochka's company has started doing. So for example, the giant stories, those are like the best things to, I guess, analyze. Yeah, best things to analyze. With the Demon Realm Spring being the first giant story, it basically marked the end of the beginning, you can say, of this novel. Then once we reach to the giant Tamaki and get the giant story of the torch that swallowed the myth, that right there is rising action. And then now here we are at the climax of the story, you can say, maybe. Yeah, I would say it's the climax, where we're getting this new giant story, which I guess I'll say it now since I read through it already. But the giant story, the seasons of light and darkness, which is the climax. So then that would mean that there will be 2 more giant stories. And also, Kim Do-shika completed his twist, so he's still continuing on the path of the final story. But yeah, Kim Do-shika of course said no, and is pretty much waiting for the dragon to revive. Which then now, we get like a description about the dragon, which I actually really like. So, quote, "From the center of the hottest hell, a dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns will awaken. It will be a dragon among dragons, a leader of all dragons born within the center of chaos, and the world's oldest hatred. The dragon will look at the heavens and the earth once, before flicking its tail. That single tail flip will cause stars to fall, and one direction of the world to vanish." Which then this gets into the whole thing about there's a dragon revelation. I'll actually start explaining about the dragon revelation more in depth with the Bible, as the Bible has said that the dragon does look like this. It has 7 heads, 10 horns, and it's mostly in Revelations chapter 12. The Bible I'm going to be referencing to is the American Standard Version. Revelations chapter 12, verse 3 to 4. Quote, "And there was seen another sign in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his head 7 diadems. And his tail draweth the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon standeth before the woman that is about to be delivered, that when she is delivered, he may devour her child." And then Revelations chapter 12, verse 7 to 8. "And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels going forward to war with the dragon. And the dragon warred and his angels 8, and they prevailed not. Neither was their place found more in heaven." Which is actually interesting, because in the Bible it references Michael, which Michael in Omniscient's Viewpoint is considered as the end of Eden, the one that will cause Eden's end, while in the Bible Michael is considered the savior of heaven, which by extension could be referring to Eden. That is like super interesting, because then it goes on to with the whole part of the devil in the Bible, which you can argue and say that the devil may be already a constellation. For example, maybe the black abyssal flame dragon could be the devil, as it kind of fits with that, because he was the strongest contender for the apocalypse dragon. And I think, if I recall, he was previously actually the apocalypse dragon in one of the turns. So that's one thing that's interesting. And with Lucifer, in Omniscient's Viewpoint, Lucifer is also known as Michael. They share the same name, while Lucifer in the Bible is a completely separate entity to Michael. And like everything in this world, the entire apocalypse dragon is based on the giant story, final dragon of the book of Revelation. And pretty much now it's time to choose who is the apocalypse dragon based on all the dragon kings and stuff. So for example, the Chimera dragon, that's a contender. So is the black flame abyssal dragon and so many other dragons. And they're all pretty much fighting it out to see who will become the apocalypse dragon. And Kim Do-shika is hoping that the black flame abyssal dragon is Now we're transitioning into the Apocalypse Dragon part of the arc, with the whole war pretty much coming to an end now. So now we get to go back and visit the conference room, and everyone's kind of dead. Like all the different angels, demons, and stuff, they're all dead, except for like the Seekers of the End and like a couple others that are just straggling behind. For example, like Agris is still alive, even though he's getting jumped by everyone. I'm shocked, but overall, I like him. I like Agris as a character way more than Megatron, even though we've seen him way less. He's just a much more interesting character because Megatron is just a insane person, while Agris actually feels more realistic of a type of person, you can say. And also, he's unique. Like, for example, his cigarettes, he smokes, obviously, that's considered a sin, but he has stigmas for his cigarettes. So for example, stigma, one ciggy for agility, one ciggy for magic power. That's so cool, because the only reason he has these stigmas is because he's been smoking for, I don't know, thousands of years. I don't know how old these guys are, but for a very long time, and eventually they just turn into abilities. And with this unique stigma for the Demon King that possessed the story to overclock the incarnation by his abilities. That's interesting, because the stigma allows him to use more of his power by overriding the limitations of the incarnation's body, which I find that really cool, with his basically being a smoker for a very long time. But then now we move on to how both of their stories, Megatron's and Agris' stories, are just being summarized into being immeasurably lengthy history of evil had pursued so far, a history of resisting the good eliminated by it and being punished for it. And I still love the names of Agris' stigma for his cigarettes, and he escapes from being jumped by everyone using the stigma, one ciggy for cowardice. I love that, it's so fun. Now we move on to the Dragon King Festival, where we get to see Kim Dochka's heart of the gold dragon being used, and he being a potential candidate for the Apocalypse Dragon, which I was thinking about that when we first got introduced to the Dragon Festival, which I find that amazing. Like, all these small little things that you would think were kind of like useless from all the way at the beginning of the novel, per se. Like, for example, the Master Swordsman's left arm. That I thought was just gonna be there one time he used or something, but it came back here against Michael and was able to beat him. I love how these little small bits and pieces of the story, I guess, are being used in big events. And while Kim Dochka was basically viewing the Dragon Festival, a reincarnator was next to him, and that reincarnator started talking about basically what dragons are, the story of dragons, what they are, and typical stories, which I actually find that very interesting, because he says that like these dragons are always viewed as evil, people that like treasure money, women, and all that, which I find that interesting, because yeah, that's kind of weird. Why would a completely different species want to hoard gold and stuff, or women and stuff? Because I feel like them as a different species, they view things differently than us. They value certain things higher than us. And I also would say that why are dragons usually viewed as evil? Like the whole thing of the Siegfried killing Fafnir, and in that story, Fafnir was basically the evil one in the story, as Siegfried was the main character, was the hero in that story, which I find that really interesting. And we got more information about this reincarnator, because we know many reincarnators, they're pretty like powerful beings once upon a time, and still are pretty strong. And this being basically said that they were deceived by the current Dokebe king, which is crazy, because if you think about it, considering how old this star stream is, this person is ancient. He's been here for who knows how long and has seen so many things that happen, and thus this person was the previous generation's apocalypse dragon. Which then that goes into the whole thing about the scenarios and stuff, is that why did it take so long to reach up to this scenario? Because I feel like the only reason we reached up to this scenario was because of Kim Dochka and his crew, I feel like. Because without them, would we have reached up to this scenario point? I don't think so. I don't know. I find that really interesting. It took this long to reach up to this scenario limit. Well, now going back to the Reincarnator. The Reincarnator then goes out and basically becomes its true self, a dragon, and starts fighting the other dragons, basically scaring them off from his aura, very much. And the only one that actually tried to fight against him was the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, of course. And the fight that they had was described in the novel as a 15-year-old who's trying to fight an adult, pretty much, which I find that so funny. And of course, the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon gets defeated, and they get into a interesting discussion about polymorphing, which polymorphing dragons basically transforming into humans, you can say, but still are technically dragons, which I find that very interesting because what is considered a dragon? I don't know, because what the Apocalypse Dragon is saying is that a dragon that doesn't do polymorph, while the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon says polymorphing is fine. What is the fine line between that? Because I feel like even if you polymorph, you're still a dragon. You still have the features of a dragon. You just are in a different transformation, but you can still transfer back into what is known as typically a dragon. And then I love this. Abyssal Black Flame Dragon then says that you're a hypocrite because you literally just polymorphed, which is true. He was a human reincarnator and then became a dragon. He's a hypocrite to his own thing. I don't understand this because I feel like all these people, like Megatron, the Apocalypse Dragon, they're all hypocrites to what they preach and stuff. Well, due to the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon getting defeated, that previous generation's Apocalypse Dragon becomes the current generation's Apocalypse Dragon. And because of that, the scenario number changed from scenario 80 to 89 very fast, which is actually interesting. They just skipped scenarios because of a calamity coming into the star stream, which is interesting. But now all the constellations have to work together to not die, which then this mirrors the OG time where both sides of neutral, good, and evil have to come together to be able to defeat or seal or something the Apocalypse Dragon. So due to all the constellations having to work together, of course the nebulas are bringing out the big guns. So for example, out of the 12 Olympians, 6 of them come in and join the battle. The goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite, the atrocious war god, Ares, the spokesman woman of justice and wisdom, Athena, master of skywalk, Hermes, volcanic blacksmith, Hephaestus, pure hunter of the moonlight, Artemis. And then coming from Vedas is 3 of the Lopabal, in addition of Surya, which Surya left Vedas, the god king of Yashkas, Kubra, Puring Flames Angi, and even Unending Storm Vayu. And then, yeah, just a bunch of other nebulas are just saying the constellations. They don't get mentioned in the novel, so that's fine. Now the first phase has started. The first tail flick will annihilate a quarter of the star stream, which is actually, interesting in the sense that in the Bible, the Dragon Revelation was able to bring down a third of these stars from the sky down to Earth, which is interesting because then Michael and his archangels were able to defeat the Apocalypse Dragon in there. So you could argue and say that somehow the Apocalypse Dragon is weaker in the Bible, even though the Apocalypse Dragon was able to bring down more stars, which is interesting. That might just prove that there's like upscaling with Michael and the archangels. also upscaling the Apocalypse Dragon. So I'm thinking the Bible representations of these characters are just much stronger than the Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint characters. While everyone else is preparing on facing against the tail flick, a good amount of the constellations just run after the dragon for some reason. The only reason they have is that they gotta get a crazy giant story, but I don't know why. They just run at the dragon and expect to somehow beat it, even though this is a calamity in the Starstream. So I don't know why, but Kim Dochka then explains what this attack is going to be. So it's separated up into 3 phases. The first phase is a electrical shockwave, basically frying everything. Second phase, flames that basically charcoal everyone up. And then third is chaos. Basically, chaos is a neutral, you could say, attribute that you either have it or you don't, and if you need to have it to fully be able to defend against it. You can use other attributes, it's just that you need to be very strong to be able to deal with it. Oh yeah, remember those constellations that went to attack? Yeah, they're all like dead because of the electricity. But to be able to counteract against these phases, you need to have a status, to use your status of the same attribute or use an opposing attribute against the attack, pretty much. So now we got constellations basically going up to try to block it. So first we got Thor with his star relic Mjolnir, which Thor is a narrative great constellation, so he's pretty strong. So he goes up and tries to be like a lightning rod, you can say, and was able to survive the first blast at him, but he's getting very fried and almost dead. So interesting enough, basically you need just electricity based constellations, and there wasn't that many present. If Indra was there, it would have been nice too. So we got Dionysus coming up, which is interesting because you think he's like the god of wine and stuff like that, but he actually inherited Zeus's abilities, you can say, like Zeus's story of lightning throne. So he's able to use electricity based stuff, so he goes in and helps him and was able to neutralize it a little bit, but still not looking good for Thor. Thor is completely just vaporized, kind of. He's still alive, he's still there, but he's just not looking too good. So then Dojta comes in with electrification, and his giant story is pretty much just backing him up. Even though he's not a lightning-based constellation, with all of his stories and electrification, he's able to help Dionysus and Thor, so they won't die, pretty much. But usually it will be like handled by 3 lightning-based constellations, typically, in the original novel. Who comes in and helps? It's not a constellation, but it's one of the strongest transcendents in all of the Starstream, pretty much. Kurumos Rojman. And because of his help, they were able to survive the first phase, the lightning phase. But due to the first phase, 500 constellations started out, and now there's less than half of that. So, and that's just from the first phase. The next phases are going to get harder, with the next phase being flame and then chaos being the strongest phase of them all. Due to the death of many constellations, a lot of the constellations are saying that this scenario should not exist. This scenario is way too hard for them. And I think the only reason they're saying this, because the Beirut just does not care. They're like, the scenario will continue on and stuff. And the constellations were taken back. They're like, how could you? Because if you think about it, the constellations are the ones that feed the Beirut money and stuff. They are needed. It's a symbiotic relationship. The streamers are needed for the constellations to view different incarnations or scenarios so they can spend money and so on. But the thing is, though, since the scenarios are slowly ending, they don't need as many constellations anymore since we're getting close to the final scenario now. So I think that's the only reason. But then comes also this interesting thing is that the constellations have at the final scenario, they somehow don't care. Like, they do not care about this scenario, the 89 scenario, basically, which is shocking because I feel like it's not that far from the final scenario, like the final scenario constellations of Poseidon, Zeus, and so on. They basically frown upon this, which is very interesting. But now let's move back onto the second phase of the tail flick, which there's gonna be a need of heat-based constellations, which from the previous constellations that I've listed, there are a few. So there's Uriel, the abyssal black flame dragon, and Agni, the purifying flame. They're basically the main constellations for this. And Agni is the one that was front and center for this and was pretty much burnt away. Like, he was pretty much just burnt to a crisp, which is crazy, I feel like, because he's one of the strongest in the Loka Ball, and just in general, strongest in Vedas, apart from the 30 main constellations and Indra and stuff. Like, the Loka Ball is the equivalent to the 12 Olympians, which is crazy if you think about it, because they're all narrative level constellations, obviously varying in strength, but still, he's also purely fire-based too. And as such, everyone's basically giving their power to the constellations defending, basically giving probability, which probability is interesting. It's just one's wish, a dream, a desire not to give up until the end of the story that everyone else had given up on already, which that's interesting. That's like an interesting way of saying what probability is. It's just one's wish to fight against something, to overcome challenges, which overall I find that very interesting. But many constellations that were given a probability pretty much are backing away, as they're saying that it's not worth it, as in the end they're all going to die pretty much. But during this desperate time, pretty much, Kim Dochka, of course, being the main character and being the Demon King of Salvation, one who saves people, continues forward with his allies and summons Pluto with the help of basically summoning Pluto using the help of the on the roads probability and stuff, with the father of the rich knight piloting it. And he alone, while the other constellations are backing away because they're getting overwhelmed, Hades alone piloting Pluto, the star relic, pretty much star weapon, is blocking the entire wave alone, pretty much, using his giant story of the underworld. And when I was reading that part, it was giving me chills, because if you think about it, it took one mythic level constellation to completely just nullify the second wave, while many narrative level constellations could barely even kept it from, like, I don't know, destroying them. And he's just there, just stopping it. And then I love this. I love the little family interaction. And Kim Dochka, of course, says that he's still at an age to rely on his parents, because Persephone says that don't typically people from the Korean peninsula leave their parents at an early age, which that reminds Kim Dochka of his past, where he basically lived off on his own when he was 17. But here he is with both of his parents basically helping him, and he's just relying on them, and I love that. This is like one of my favorite parts that I guess has happened to Kim Dochka, the feeling he had when both of his parents responded to his call and are here helping him out, even if it means basically destroying themselves. Quote, "Abruptly, a corner of my heart became tingling just a little. I ended up remembering the empty spots reserved for my parents during school events. Back when I was still a student, I always wondered how my friends felt back then. What did it feel like having someone fill up those spots? Having someone who come to you when you called out to them," which I love that so much, because it shows Kim Dochka as like a character. He didn't really grow up having parents like love from his parents and stuff. He always had that part of his heart just empty. And of course, the only way to cope with all of his pains and sorrows is through reading. And here he is now. That empty space in his heart is getting filled up, has been filled up due to Hades and Persephone. He finally understands how those kids felt, having his own parents come when he needed them most. I love that. And that just goes to show Hades and Persephone being the best parents in all of Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. And I love the little dynamic they have because it's lovely. Like the wife and husband relationship, because Persephone is basically complaining to Hades that like it's her turn to ride on Pluto. That's what they agreed on and everything. And I love that. So that's just a fun little like couples dynamic and stuff. I love that. And saying to Hades that stop being stubborn and stuff. It's not possible with just you. And this is when one of Hades' stories activates. Listening to one's wife would give you teok even when you're asleep. I love that. It's so like cute because it shows how much he loves her and trusts her as a wife, and how Persephone treats Hades. They both treat each other equally. They view each other. They respect each other. They love each other. And I love that because if you compare that to like the other Olympians and stuff, that doesn't really happen. They're not that close or anything. And I overall love that interaction. Definitely one of the best couples in all of Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. And as such, they basically team up. Persephone is using the probability of the underworld like a classical piece of music, which I find that such cool imagery used. Like, she's using the probability of the underworld, so the entire nebula of the underworld, and is using like notes and stuff as like classical music, like, you know, like the different notes for music come up, and she's conducting it like a conductor and is feeding it to Hades. And I find that so cool. And that's also going into the whole thing about how she isn't just a queen, she's the queen regent, basically meaning that she has 50% of the probability. She has the same shares as what Hades has for the underworld, which is just amazing. I love that. And of course, with Hades and Persephone coming out and basically saving everyone, those who are in the final scenario, so Hades, Poseidon, and others, are basically mad that Hades basically has come into this scenario, as he's also a final scenario constellation and a mythic level constellation, so it's kind of unfair. Just a little thing. Hades is having so much fun just like blocking the wave of heat and stuff. He was like cackling and stuff. And I love that. That just makes him more of a character instead of like this cold ruler of the underworld. He has a warm heart, obviously to his son and wife, but just in general, it gives more life to the character. I love that. Due to Hades single-handedly stopping the wave, the second phase comes to an end. But however, since Hades has incarnated into the scenario, that means that the third phase, the phase of chaos, will be sped up in like very fast. It will happen in like a minute pretty much. And that's when Megatron finally realized he screwed up. Because basically what his whole plan is to summon the dragon and then basically destroy Eden by creating the seal to stop the Apocalypse Dragon, but he realizes that the seal won't be made in time, so he kind of miscalculated at that point, and his also goal was to finish up the crazy evil and stuff like that. So with the third phase coming in very fast, everyone's trying to mobilize just enough, like, I guess, power, in the sense that to find people that use the power of chaos is kind of hard, since beings that are constellations of demon kings can't really use it unless it's like special circumstances. So those that basically are both, so Michael and Kamduchka, they step up, and then Jung Hiran, she also steps up, since, well, like I said, Judge of Destruction, it should be the Judge of Apocalypse, but no, that's besides the point. She uses the power of chaos. mostly due to Kim Duchka realizing it, and also that her hair and her, I guess, aura that she gives off when she uses her ability gives off the, I guess, effects of chaos, or just like the color of chaos, like the white and stuff like that. So they step up and go. So Michael goes full power and everything, and then gets instantly crushed by the wave of chaos. He's practically like just dying down there. So everyone knows that they're screwed, since if Michael, a pretty much peak level, narrative level constellation, gets basically slammed easily, then we're all screwed. And that's also one thing though. With each phase progressively getting harder, it shows, because the first phase, it took only 4 people to block it, and they're most of them with narrative level and so on. But then the second phase took 1 mythic level to be able to completely stop it, after multiple nebulas and very strong narrative level constellations couldn't like withstand it, as the nebulas gave their probability. And now here we are at the third phase, which I don't think we're gonna survive. And so Kim Duchka knows that, so he basically is going to sacrifice himself, like always, to pretty much go into the field of chaos, you can say, the wave of chaos. And the way he's got to do that is using Surya, with Surya's train, pretty much, and just sends him off. And the train is being powered by Kim Duchka's stories. And so he pretty much goes through the field of chaos and unleashes something, which I did not expect this. I did not expect him unleashing this when I was reading. He unleashed a out of God, pretty much. And I got chills from it, just from reading it, as basically he summons the real indescribable distance, also known as the Nameless Mist. I'm going to be using Nameless Mist throughout, so yeah. And that's actually crazy, because the whole reason of bringing out the Nameless Mist is, first of all, it's a out of God born within chaos. And it was also the calamity that destroyed the Demon Realm, but that's besides the point. The one that destroyed the Demon Realm was just a clone of it, a much smaller and weaker version of it, and yet even then, narrative level constellations couldn't even do anything. They just froze when seeing it. And so now Kim Duchka's inside the Nameless Mist, because of course. And while he's vibing in there, just dying pretty much, the fourth wall has a inner monologue kicking in, which I don't know why. I feel like sometimes the fourth wall just does weird stuff and just has an inner monologue just talking about it. But it basically is mostly because Kim Duchka is distorting probability, and due to him basically abusing probability a lot, like people's wishes, dreams, and stuff like that. Basically just screwing up every single scenario possible, pretty much. His karma, basically the after effects of screwing up everything, are going to be crazy, as basically it goes down to the point of every single major story has some sort of loss. So, for example, the different giant stories, they each had something that was lost during it, and so this story will also have a major loss, as that's how the Star Stream works with all the major stories. And while Kim Duchka is just hanging on in there in the Nameless Mist, pretty much, or just chaos or whatever, he's using story control. That's pretty much the only main reason, is to buff his stories, and they're basically helping him survive the distortions and stuff, the story probability. So though the plan of bringing the Nameless Mist to eat Kim Duchka, but then change targets to eat the Apocalypse Dragon, is insane. Like, what constellation or Demon King would have actually thought of doing that? Bringing in a calamity to eat the other calamity. That is actually insane. But while Kim Duchka is vibing in the realm of chaos, we get back to the main team, and they're all like pretty much trying to run towards Kim Duchka to save him. But Anna Croft is basically holding the team back with, I think, Asgard's, like, with her backing of like Asgard, which I don't know what happened in this like span of time, but somehow Anna Croft and Asgard made amends or something, and they're not friends. I don't know why, But when it comes to Han Se-young, this is what I really like, because I feel like the two people that know each other, that understand each other the most, I feel like, is Han Se-young and Kim Do-chka. Obviously, in the end, Yoo Jin-yook and Kim Do-chka are superior due to, well, Kim Do-chka basically reading Yoo Jin-yook basically his whole life, you can say. But I would say Han Se-young understands Kim Do-chka probably the second most, I think, or the most, you can argue. But she's basically saying that she hates when Kim Do-chka sacrifices himself. Pretty much the most out of everyone. Yoo Jin-yook obviously doesn't want Kim Do-chka to die, but like now that I feel like that's more now since of his promise of not regressing. But Han Se-young, I feel like from like pretty like around the start, not like the start, but around the start, still valued Kim Do-chka a lot. I mean, a lot of their little interactions from back then, I love that. But then this goes into the whole idea of being friends with Kim Do-chka. It's just sad because he always sacrifices himself for you. And then it always goes back into the circle of the team trying to go save Kim Do-chka from not sacrificing himself. But as the team is planning on going to go save him, the Nameless Mist out of nowhere starts to clone itself, which the clones are pretty much similar to the one that we saw at the industrial complex, the Nameless Mist that ate up the entire 73rd Demon Realm. But while a lot of constellations are just pretty much terrified, peeing themselves and whatnot, Gyro's first sword is stepping up to fight it. He and Kirogos, Kim Do-chka's master, both team up like they did in the past, and he finally did it. He was able to slash and kill the Nameless Mist, a monster that had no end. You couldn't see where it started or where it ended. He used the fourth law, fourth sword that beheads the emptiness. And that's actually insane because the sword slice was insane in the sense that no other constellation could actually understand how it even like happened, how the sword attack even happened, except Yoo Jin-yook. But even then, with all of his like experience with up to his third regression and stuff, he was stunned because obviously in his previous regressions he's seen crazy swordsmanship and stuff like that, and even he was stunned, which knowing that is crazy. But with the clone dying and stuff, everyone's celebrating, but of course it was too good to be true. After all, the Nameless Mist is a calamity in the star stream and started just infinitely cloning itself till like thousands of them are just like vibing up in the air, just eating up everything. And that's the true horror of the star stream, because it doesn't matter where you are, there will always be something higher than you, something that will overcome any accomplishment you have done. The small accomplishments you've done mean nothing in the face of this. And so this is when the mass production maker comes in. And I love how everyone just views him as useless. Like, why is this Henry Ford guy coming in? And yeah, even though he's a narrative level constellation, he's pretty much weak in the sense that he doesn't really like fight. He's just a good businessman. But then the mass production maker starts talking about stories and coins, which then this gets into the whole idea about how everything in the star stream is stories. And if everything in the star stream is stories, then what are coins? Why do we exchange coins instead of stories? It's because coins are stories also. And that is actually insane. I love that, like, because stories have always been a pivotal part of the novel, and once he like said that everything within is created with stories, I got some goosebumps, because every little thing is made from stories. The swords you have, the clothing and everything in general is just made through stories. And so his story, materialism, and he basically believes in capitalism. I love that. But his story, materialism, which is, using all the coins he has and his story materialism, he is able to summon a portal. And this portal is special because it's a portal that only Dokubes are able to summon. So basically, he says that he can't fight, so he's gonna use all of his power to summon people from around the, I guess, different realms or dimensions and stuff. So for example, the Invincible Fist comes in. A bunch of Transcendents come in. The Breaking the Sky Sword Sage comes in. And Jang Hee-young also comes in, which finally she's being useful, which I'm happy about, because as the second protagonist of the original novel, she needs some like, I don't know, respect. And basically the reason she's gonna be useful is because she was able to make a temporary contract with the constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband. And as such, Wukong was able to incarnate into the system, into the scenario and stuff, and was able to shift the battle as all those nameless mists and stuff get destroyed as Wukong gets full power, because it then talks about Wukong's different stories, the different nicknames he has. And it's actually crazy because I feel like he has multiple just giant stories just in him. I feel like he, in general, well, the next arc is going to be Journey to the West, but he is easily one of the strongest beings in the whole Star Stream just because of his just stories, so many stories he has. But now we get like a little shift to Jang Hee-young's like time during on the Isle and stuff, and this actually I kind of like that because we get more development of the character, and I still find it funny that no matter what, she still can't separate Kim Dutchka and the Demon King of Salvation, which I find so interesting. It's just like you can't separate your idol with who they actually are, because the Demon King of Salvation is viewed as a pillar, a savior, you can say. While Kim Dutchka is just a funny guy. That's pretty much what it is. And she finally asks why Kim Dutchka like doesn't ask for her help or like let her join the company and stuff like that. And it all boils down to Kim Dutchka creating her as a character. So as a creator, he just wants her to live her life freely, which I feel like, yeah, that's what a creator would do for their creations, just live their life to whatever they view as fun and like whatever they want. And as such, through all this like thinking and like, I guess, contemplating about the Demon King's salvation and just wanting to be useful, she evolves her wall, so her unidentifiable wall, into the wall of impossible communication. One of the main walls regarding the final wall. Now moving back onto the battle, as Wukong is basically destroying all the Nameless Mists clones, he was able to open up a hole in the sky for the three main people now from the Kim Dutchka company, Han Soo-young, Jung Hee-won, and Yoo Jin-yuk, to basically go after Kim Dutchka, as they're pretty much the strongest ones right there. And the thing is, though, as they're like going through the, I guess, flood of chaos and stuff over to Kim Dutchka, who's in the Nameless Mist, they face clones of the Nameless Mist, which obviously I think in normal circumstances they would have a rough time of beating. But since Kim Dutchka is practically on the verge of death and is sacrificing himself, the stigma, his only stigma at this point, sacrificial will, is active, which basically just raises their, like, his companions' combat abilities through like a high extent. And the thing is, though, it's almost maxed out too, which is crazy. It just shows how much Kim Dutchka has sacrificed for them. And while they're like going through both Han Soo-young and Jung Hee-won's constellations, Uriel and the Black Abyssal Flame Dragon, they both are kind of running out of power, as they also have to deal with the Nameless Mists. So they're basically saying, we have to take some of our power away that we've given to you. And I love this like line, because in all this serious action happening, life and death, the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon says that he needs to use the bathroom, so it'll be harder to use his powers, which is just, it's just a little fun comic relief in there. And so basically it gets to a point where the three of them are fighting on who should be the one to go after Kim Dochka, as they equally all have not enough power to go individually, but if they use all like their individual power and empower one individual, that person should be able to reach Kim Dochka. So they're like fighting, and I find this really fun how Kim Dochka is still a troll even when he's on the verge of death, saying that like sending like a direct message to each of them saying that you are the one that will save me. And I love that because Han Se-young basically is the one that steps up and is like saying, I will go save him because I want to save Kim Dochka, I don't want him to die and stuff. And both Jung Hee-won and Yoo Jin-hyuk are like shocked because Han Se-young is not like the type of person that would do this, try to sacrifice himself to go and save Kim Dochka and stuff. And I find that really funny. But now moving back to the nameless misclones, since Wukong used too much power, as the probability is already completely screwed up, he has to like go away, but as he's going away, he basically hypes up everyone. And I think because of that hyping up, they actually were able to survive. Like a lot of people were able to survive. But now we're also moving back on to Megatron, who's trying to activate the seal and set it up against the Apocalypse Dragon. And he realizes it's too late. The seal is not going to work, even if he uses all of Eden's probability and stuff like that. And I like this because that's when Agris comes along, still injured and everything, which actually Agris is a Chad. Like, I'm being honest, even though he got like completely like destroyed and everything, he is still vibing. He's still alive, and he got jumped by everyone, and he let go of the oldest evil. He basically rejected it now. And so now Megatron finally understands Agris, as in the sense that they both now understand that they understood each other better than anyone else, as they're both the embodiment of the oldest good and oldest evil. Without one, there won't be the other. So that makes sense in the sense that they know each other better than everyone else. So in the end, Agris is telling Megatron just to save everyone. Just save everyone at this point. Since basically, I don't know why it took them so long, but for them to both understand that good and evil are both needed to save everyone, as like the oldest good and oldest evil and stuff, as that's what happened originally. The oldest good, oldest evil, and the neutral constellations all came together to be able to stop the Apocalypse Dragon and save everyone. Now with the destruction of the world, the only way to survive is through the Ark. And of course, if there's an Ark, Noah is here. I'm shocked that Noah actually kind of survived, because Noah was fighting against Han Se-young, and I guess he just didn't die or something. I don't know. But that's interesting though, because there's so many Bible references in this great war, and they're all being used in their own way, you can say. Because the Ark is now being used in the same way as in the Bible, as to save people from calamity. But this calamity isn't caused by God, but by the devil, or whatever the representation of the Apocalypse Dragon is. And of course, when both Megatron and Agris are talking about this, of course Asmodeus comes in, the most cunning demon, and probably the Demon King we got like the most character development of, except for our own Demon King, Kim Dochka, Demon King Salvation. But yeah, he basically tries to get the wall, so the wall that divides evil, I'm assuming, from Agris. But Agris said he already gave it to someone else, which I'm curious on who he gave it to. And so doesn't that also mean that Megatron also had a wall? Like the wall that divides good or something? And I don't think it's stated that Megatron actually gave his wall away, so I don't know what that wall was gonna be doing. But yeah, then we move back onto the trio, and Jung Hee-won chooses to give her power to Han Se-young and Yoo Jin-hyuk, basically like angel wings or something to help them progress through the mist of chaos. Now we move back to Dochiko, who's just hanging around in the mist, kind of just drifting, only staying alive due to his stories, but still pretty much going to die. But we get his perspective on the battle between the two calamities, the Nameless Mist and the Apocalypse Dragon, and Dochika is saying that the Nameless Mist has the upper hand, and it's mostly due to time, which this keeps on, I feel like, getting like stated time, as the Nameless Mist has been around Starstream, kind of just devouring dimensions and realms and stuff, and it's just been a nuisance, but for a long time, while the Apocalypse Dragon has just recently awoken, so its power isn't at its peak pretty much. And that keeps on going with the stories, as they both technically run on stories. Well, the Apocalypse Dragon's technically a constellation, I think. It uses the giant story and blah blah blah, while the Nameless Mist is an outer god, which is completely different from a typical constellation, so I guess that. But then he uses Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, I think the level 30 or the third stage, to view pretty much what's happening as the outer body experience. He views everyone fighting and escaping, and while he's viewing around there, Buddha is basically looking at him, as Buddha's the one facilitating the whole island, and the end goal of the island now is, since the dragon can't be sealed through Eden, it's going to be sealed using the Isle of Reincarnation. That's, yeah. But, yeah, Dochika, of course, going to sacrifice himself, and told the Buddha that to just leave him, just save everyone, to seal up the island and just save his friends. And he knows that he can't escape since, well, he's kind of trapped there. I just want to say this, I might have already said it before, but this is mostly just regarding the twist that the Kim Dochika company is going after, and just in general, the giant stories. So a giant story is pretty much around equal terms with a mythic level story, but what makes a giant story special is that it's based on shares on basically the giant story. And I feel like that's overall interesting, but I feel like the big core thing is that each giant story we have seen so far has been a step in the direction of the overall story. So for example, the Demon Realm Spring, that is around the beginning giant story, while the Torch That Swallowed the Myth would be the rising action. And then here we are at the climax of the whole story, which I would say it's also the climax, without even thinking about this whole twist stuff. But the current story that they're progressing to, the giant story, would be considered the climax. And then the next story they're going to get, which is going to happen in the Journey to the West remake, is going to be their following action, and then the conclusion, which all these stories, I feel like, just go towards the final scenario, the last story, which then comes to mind that it took Constellations thousands of years to reach up to this point, where Kim Dochika's company kind of reached at this point in 3 years? And I feel like they could have done it sooner. And so I'm very confused about that. And then that also goes into question about the whole Ragnarok thing. But is Ragnarok a one-time thing, or is that just been happening like the Giant Tamaki, which is a giant story that's been kind of just been mass produced? So I don't know, that's just overall interesting. And another thing about giant stories is that you only see individual constellations, not nebulas at the final scenario. How does that work? Is what they're trying to say that those who share the most shares of a giant story are allowed to continue for the final scenario, or how does that work? Because for example, Olympus, they have 3 constellations that are at the final scenario: Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus, and probably others, which I don't think they're stated. I'm assuming Gaia or Nyx, maybe, if they exist in this universe. they would probably be at the final scenario too. So how does that work compared to like the other constellations like Dionysus, Hephaestus? Why don't they get the shares, in the sense that they have shares in the giant stories, but they're not at the final scenario? I wonder how's that even work? But now I'll just move on to Kim Dochka after my little rant there. We basically now move on to Kim Dochka's stories about his younger years, pretty much. His stories are slowly getting cut off, not like stop telling the stories and stuff. And I feel like the biggest thing about this little like flashback is how Kim Dochka still obviously reads and stuff. And when he was asked what he wants to be a reader, pretty much. Like, his teacher told him, oh, do you want to be a writer since you like to read and stuff? He's like, no, I want to be a reader, which at first the teacher was confused and then understood as every book needs a reader. You can't just be a writer without the reader, which then this also correlates with Han Soo-young and Kim Dochka. The writer and reader, without those two, both of them won't exist. Without one, the other won't exist. Same thing with the whole Yoo Jin-yuk being main character. Without both of them, the reader and writer, he wouldn't exist technically. But that's besides the point. The teacher then passed away a couple days later, which is interesting because I feel like this whole thing about the teacher being positive about Kim Dochka being a reader is interesting in the sense that when that positive part of his life came in, it easily got taken away fast. Because if you look at Kim Dochka's life, he didn't really have friends. His parents didn't really exist. His mom went to jail, dad died, and dad before then was abusive, so he kind of just only read. He only read 3 Ways to Survive, which is actually really interesting about how those that influenced Kim Dochka all kind of just drift away. All the positive influences, the only positive influence was the novel. And when he's like thinking about all of this, he has thoughts about giving up, but in the end, he wants to live, to see through all these stories and go with his companions to the end. Now we move back onto the duo that's going after Kim Dochka. Han Soo-young really wants to save him. Like, usually in the past, she's pretty like nonchalant, doesn't really care much. But this time she really wants to save him, like to the point that she's like biting down on her lip and is bleeding and stuff, which is good character development overall. Like, she cares about Kim Dochka so much. Obviously, she has cared about him a lot in the past, but this time she can't really predict what's going to happen. As in the past, things weren't as complex as this, with like entities like the Nameless Mist, the Apocalypse Dragon, so many different variables coming in. And so in the end, she and Yoo Jin-yuk talk, and in the end, she gives her power off to Yoo Jin-yuk, which then he uses all the stories he's earned with Kim Dochka and goes through the fog to reach to his body. And as he almost reached Kim Dochka's body, oh yeah, keep in mind that Yoo Jin-yuk's body is kind of just getting destroyed pretty much through the mist and everything. Someone stops him. Someone grabs Kim Dochka and looks at Yoo Jin-yuk. And it's someone who is wearing Kim Dochka's same jacket, the same color, and looks remarkably similar to Yoo Jin-yuk himself. It's Sigurd the Plotter. Sigurd the Plotter basically stopped Yoo Jin-yuk, and Yoo Jin-yuk's sponsor, which we still have no clue what their name is or anything, was shaken up. Which also is interesting because I feel like Yoo Jin-yuk's sponsor hasn't really done much here. The only thing is like maybe when Yoo Jin-yuk should have regressed, the sponsor did something, like said something, and he didn't regress. Well, no, when he was meant to regress but didn't, and that's when his sponsor said something. They obviously, Sigurd Plotter and Yoo Jin-yuk talk and stuff, and one thing I really find interesting is that Sigurd Plotter says this: A being who understood a story the best was not the reader who had read it, but the character that actually lived through that very story, which is such a hard line. That's such a good line, but I also feel like it's interesting that like sentence is interesting in the sense that yes, but also no. I feel as though the reader can see things that even the main character or the person who's gone through the story hasn't seen, as they learn about certain things, aspects of other characters that the character doesn't. So I feel like it's hand in hand. You could make arguments for both sides, but in the end, you could just say they both understand things that each other would not be able to understand. Now we move back onto Yu Sang-ha and the Buddha, who basically are just talking. The Buddha is starting to vanish as well, basically sealing the aisle and stuff. And Yu Sang talks about the library, which I actually find that really interesting because somehow the Buddha actually knows about the library's existence. I feel like the Buddha in general is an interesting constellation, as there's so much knowledge in the Buddha, but the Buddha just exists. Kind of like the final scenario constellations. They have so much information about things, but they kind of just like exist and not really interfere much. But as Yu Sang talks about the library, the Hounds of Tindalos come in, and that's actually really interesting. They are from H.P. Lovecraft, so same thing as the Nameless Mist. They're from the Cthulhu myths. And I'm not too sure why they come, because I really don't know anything about them or what's their motive or anything. And they were, I'm assuming, planning on eating her to gain like the information about the library, maybe, because the library is pretty much everything, in the sense that it gives us so much information about the world and about the previous regressions and stuff that it's like super valuable. But in the end, the Buddha basically saves her. And I find it interesting though, the Buddha recognizes that Sigurd the Plotter is here. And I find it interesting that the Buddha knows that Sigurd the Plotter is the one who stands at the end of the cycle. What is the end of the cycle? Is it the different regressions that Eugen Yuk has had? But that wouldn't make any sense, because when it comes to Sigurd the Plotter sending Kim Dochka back to the 1863rd, I think, turn, and at that point there was 2 Eugen Yuks. So how does that even work? Because I think, doesn't one regress while the other one doesn't? So wouldn't that mean that Sigurd the Plotter isn't the one that ends the cycle? That's one thing I'm kind of like confused about. Now let's move back onto Sigurd the Plotter and Kim Dochka. Pretty much Sigurd the Plotter and Eugen Yuk are just talking and just chatting away. And Eugen Yuk understands the gap in their strength. Like, even with all the giant stories, everything he's pulling out in this regression he has, it's still nothing to Sigurd the Plotter. It's like an ant to a human. But even with this ginormous gap they have, Eugen Yuk still wants to save his life and death companion, Kim Dochka. And so they clash, and I quote, "It felt as if his soul was crashing down to the far side of the cosmos, just from the clashing of their blades. Just one collision, and his right arm was shattered to bits, and his ribs shattered." Which, just reading that line is insane, because if we looked up to Eugen Yuk throughout this entire turn, he's kind of just been overpowered. No matter who he faces, he either always survives or always beats them. For example, Indra, high-class narrative level constellation, gets destroyed by Eugen Yuk going full power. And here we have Eugen Yuk going full power and probably even stronger than the time when he attacked Indra and couldn't really do anything. But in the end, he still is trying to fight Sigurd the Plotter, and he uses pretty much all the news stories he's had. as they have a conversation about stories, about how Sigurd the Plotter has pretty much all the stories that Eugen Yuk has had. But the thing is, though, he doesn't have these special stories that only him and Kim Dochka were able to accomplish. As in this term, Kim Dochka existed. In all the previous terms, Kim Dochka never existed, so he was never able to get these unique stories. And when Eugen Yuk is talking about his new stories, Sigurd the Plotter just responds, "No, I do not know of this life, O puppet of the oldest dream," which when reading that, I love that line. It's simple, but I loved it. It was such a hard line to just say, so like casually too, because he was uninterested. He didn't really care or anything, Sigurd the Plotter. He's kind of just there. But then they get into a whole talk about constellations, in the sense that Sigurd the Plotter, as he's also Eugen Yuk, he said, "Why are you trying to save Kim Dochka? At the end of the day, isn't he just another constellation you hate so much?" As that's pretty much his goal for this turn. That was his goal, to destroy all the constellations, as he pretty much despises constellations. And what Eugen Yuk said was that Kim Dochka isn't a constellation. He's simply a human, which is so good. That was such a good line. I loved it, because that shows their companionship, their life and death companionship, in the sense that I feel like if Kim Dochka did not talk to Eugen Yuk during the Middle Island part of the arc, then he would never say that he's just simply a human, as Kim Dochka would never have introduced himself as, "I'm simply Kim Dochka. I'm not the king of a kingless world. I am not the demon king of salvation." And that was such a beautiful line. Of course, Sigurd the Plotter is unfazed with that, and then explains how Kim Dochka has always been a constellation ever since he was born, as he's always placed his own misfortunes for Eugen Yuk. He substituted it, in the sense that Kim Dochka grew up depressed, in the sense that he didn't really have friends or anything, a loving family, and so he would read 3 Ways to Survive and would, I guess, substitute his misfortunes for whatever Eugen Yuk suffered in the novel, which I feel like is overall interesting interpretation. As with that thinking, that kind of goes into that everyone is a constellation in some way, because we all place our misfortunes in for someone else's. It's actually kind of interesting, because we all consume stories, as we've all read books and seen characters and stuff like that, which overall is interesting interpretation from Sigurd the Plotter. However, with time running out, as the arc is going to leave pretty soon, Eugen Yuk has to use all of his power, all the stories he has gotten so far, the help of Uriel and the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, to attack Sigurd the Plotter one last time, using Breaking the Sky Thunder Sword with Shooting Star Slash. It's pretty much everything that he's gotten in this entire regression, this turn, in that one attack, while Sigurd the Plotter just uses Hell's Eternity, the mythic story that was created by the 1,864 lives of Eugen Yuk. And with just that one story alone, Eugen Yuk of our turn was destroyed pretty much. His Black Heavenly Demon Sword gets destroyed. His attack was destroyed. He's pretty much, before he was on death's door, he's now 100% on death's door. And he was only saved due to the hounds chasing after the Abyss, which were the hounds of Tindalos, the ones that were going to eat Yu Sangha. And that's really interesting, because these hounds kind of just appear out of nowhere now, but they're actually strong enough to actually have Sigurd the Plotter get scared. And I think it's mostly because since he used a lot of probability to be summoned here, he is like way weaker against these outer gods, so he could actually like die. But in the end, Sigurd the Plotter does escape with Kim Dochka, and Eugen Yuk drifts off to the arc. In the end, the Isle was gone, with the scenario over and Kim Dochka completing his twist. With the giant story, Season of Light and Darkness is born. Okay, just like a side note now, I feel like the whole twist completion, it was said it was only given to Kim Dochka, which is interesting because if you factor in other people, why didn't they get a twist? And how does like this whole twist work? Because is it only given to constellations, or can it be given to incarnations or transcendence? Because I feel like Yoojin Yuk also pulled a lot of his weight during this time. I understand that Kim Dochka kind of orchestrated a lot of the events, having the different outer gods come in and just ruin the scenario, but I wonder. Now it's time for final thoughts and me just yapping a little bit to you. But I just want to say this. Thank you all for listening me rant about Omniscient Ryu's Viewpoint. I'm very thankful for that, but I guess I would just like say overall this is my favorite arc. And overall I just talked about what I liked about it and just gave off like a very long summary of the arc, just all the key points about the arc and a little bit more in depth of each part, I guess. And if I said stuff wrong, then I'm sorry, and you could just state that in the comments and stuff. Kind of view each giant story as each section, as the giant story, the Demon Realm Spring, as the beginning, while the Giant Tamaki, the Torch That Swallowed the Myth giant story, as the rising action, and then here we are at the giant story Seasons of Light and Darkness as the climax. So of course the climax is meant to be very good and stuff, and overall I enjoyed it. I loved Persephone and Hades, first of all, best couple in my opinion. It's just, yeah, I love them. I love the character dynamic with each other and Kim Dochka, and Kim Dochka's whole entire, I guess, character development with family, how he views his parents now, Hades and Persephone. I overall love that. That was so heartwarming, as it's relatable, as Kim Dochka grew up without having like his parents with him and stuff, and they didn't really exist for him, and this time his adopted parents actually existed. They came when he asked for them and did so much more than he could ask for, and that's just, I love that. That was amazing. And like the whole entire, I guess, character arcs of Jung Ki-won as being the Judge of Destruction, I love that. Still, I want the name to be changed to Judge of Apocalypse, but it's good enough. And then the whole reveal of Secret the Plotter and like the conflicts with the Calamities, love that. That was such a good like twist at the end, because I would not expect Kim Dochka to just bring the Nameless Mist over to fight the Calamity. That is actually insane. I was kind of like expecting maybe like different constellations. Like for example, I'd reference the story of Siegfried for Fafnir, and I was thinking like maybe they could have incorporated that, like bring up like legendary dragon slayers, you can say, from the myths, and use those with the main cast to defeat the Apocalypse Dragon. I feel like that would have been actually very cool if they would have done that. Obviously, we know that like the swords do exist, but that'll be cool. And I feel like overall the entire philosophy behind good and evil is good. It was well done. I overall like Agris more than Megatron, even though Agris had less, I guess, time in the spotlight. And yeah, overall though, like good and evil is kind of subjective, as Megatron has said that good is made up from a bunch of different stories. There's not one story that makes up good, so that kind of puts it into like a subjective category, as something could be considered good in someone's eyes, but in other eyes it's not good. And that's explored well in Jung Ki-won, as she views certain things as evil, but the other constellations of absolute good don't view as evil. And that's really interesting. Overall, that was a cool part to incorporate, and the whole entire references to the Bible were actually pretty cool. Even though I'm not Christian, actually I should remove this, whatever. Remove this whole Christian part. But the incorporations of the Bible in the arc, I overall loved, because the Book of Revelation especially, it's just really cool to see that there, and like the different mythologies also just in the end combining with each other, with like, for example, the Lesser Key of Solomon about the whole 72 demons and stuff. Overall, very cool incorporations, and also the way they portray the Apocalypse Dragon and Michael, well done. Because they've made Michael and Lucifer the same person. That's overall really cool and reflects the in-canon stuff about how Michael is going to be the one that will bring down Eden, which in reality, it's more or less Michael's alter ego, Lucifer. And so overall, that's really cool. In general, I just overall enjoyed this arc, and in my opinion, is the best arc. And for anyone who's made it this far, I understand the video is going to be like a couple hours long and stuff, but I first of all thank you again for watching this all the way through. And I just want to say, for those who've watched up to this point, can you just comment down ways I can improve my videos, as I'm planning on just making more videos about Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint and just in stuff general, like in general, just stuff I enjoy, like books I've read or just games I like to play. And so I want your advice on what I should work on first to improve my content. Editing, or just give me tips on how to edit better, or just do voiceovers better. Anything. Just write down the first thing that you feel like is the most important thing I should work on first, as I know it's going to be a slow process. Also, can you please just comment down what my next video should be, or just some recommendations for future videos, as I'm already planning on making a video about my opinions and just a discussion about the Journey to the West arc for Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. So thank you and have a good day.